I consulted with a number of different individuals as well as my bill writing staff, and we find that there's no need for further amendments in this section, and that you've done a sufficient job in that area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So that, any other amendments or on, on section 3? All right. We'll move forward to the make work pay tax credit reconciliation, and that's on section 4. Again, the intent here is the same with the earlier provision, which is the additional child tax credit, that this credit is able to be recognized as revenue when we process the refunds, while the government of Guam gets the cash ahead of time. And in order to recognize that as being ability to appropriate, we need to ensure that the refunds are filed, reconciled, and that there is a mechanism to identify which refunds are going to be subject to the credit, and therefore, once those refunds are analyzed, they don't have to be paid out under the make work pay credit. They just have to be segregated. We know which ones are eligible under a schedule. And then we can then report that to Treasury, and we can then book those revenues. So it sets a timeline of December 31st, 2010 for tax year 2009, and then May 31st, 2011 for tax year 2010. And once that occurs, once again, and then by July 31st, 2011, we will have all of the refunds analyzed, categorized, that then will allow us to book those as revenue. So that's the effect of Section 4. Senator Uggan, you're recognized.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good morning, Mr. Speaker, and to our colleagues. I guess in terms of the establishment of the timelines, Mr. Speaker, we're looking at just 4 months, 5 months out for December 31st. Now, these are all timelines that have been acknowledged by Reventax in terms of...
No, but these are timelines that are necessary in order to ensure that that those refunds, again, they don't have to process them. They have to segregate the refunds, basically know which refunds have a Schedule M attached to it, which then means they're eligible. So there has to be, and maybe Edison can speak to that with regards to, this is really for audit purposes on the ability to recognize those revenues that we get in as cash and put them in the proper tax year.
So basically, all those tax returns that are going to be segregated in this particular case would be set aside into one section, and then they will be expedited for purposes of expending those.
That's correct.
Those funds.
They don't have to be processed by these dates, but they have to be identified and segregated.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. So Section 4. Any amendments? Questions? Okay. All right. Section 5. This is the extension. There is a possibility that the make work tax pay credit can be extended for an additional year. It is set to expire in December of this year. And so what this does is if we should get the extension and we get another $35 million, then immediately this would do would require that extension be just put into the income tax refund. 75% of it would be put into the income tax refund account so that we have the cash to begin paying refunds, and then 25% goes to general fund allocation for expenditure. So it just ensures that we don't use it all for operations and not account for the refunds that have to be credited against that remittance by the Treasury. And again, this is because in anticipation of what may happen to the extension of the credit. Okay. Section 6, prioritization of revenues in excess of monthly collections. This section requires that upon the passage of this bill, we'll get an income of the tax liability. RevTax will once again reconcile their current records and then give a report to the governor and the legislature. And then BBMR will do this monthly revenue budget based upon the adopted revenues here. And this is to identify this excess revenue that, for the reserve, basically. So what this does is they'll figure out those monthly excess revenues on the collections, and basically allow the releases of the allotments based on that monthly revenue. And then all of the excess under the income tax categories that are collected and identified based upon the revenue budget will be prioritized to under the income tax category, withholding, individual, corporate. All the excess revenues above the adopted revenues in here will go to pay off the additional refunds. So it doesn't go into the operation side, it goes into the refund side for payment of the past due refunds. And then it requires the quarterly statements, the bank statements, the reconciliation. And then one of the other features is that we're asking for a variance report in terms of the revenue collection budget and the actual collection budget, on why and for the rationale, what they attribute those misses if they occur. And that will help with the variance report. It will help the next legislature in the development of the budget in terms of analyzing where those shortfalls are, and we'll re-examine those data sets in the development of the new budget. And then, of course, we're asking the Department of Revenue and Tax to submit a strategic plan to the governor within 6 months of the enactment of this act, and they shall use these to include computations and recommendations as to the best use of the resources for payment of past due refunds to minimize interest expense. So we're trying to put in some of the administrative requirements that will give the information needed for the legislature, as well as administration, really, to develop a plan to attack this refund and get it paid as soon as possible, and hopefully, really without having to go out for another bond issue. And so the prioritization of these excess revenues will help us on that. Any additions or amendments to that? There being none, we'll move to Section 7. Section 7 is the prior year obligations and future obligation proposals. Again, this is a way to address, there's two components of prior year, the biggest one being, of course, the income tax refund due to our taxpayers. And we're addressing that matter in the excess revenue on the income tax revenue categories. So the excess revenues under the income tax revenue categories will be used to attack the deficit in terms of the past due refunds. The other component of the deficit, of course, are prior year obligations, vendor payments, payments owed employees for work done, reclassifications not paid, and those elements. And so the other revenue component of the government of Guam is the business privilege tax, or the gross receipts tax. That's the other biggest category of revenue stream. And so what this section does, Section 7, is prioritize then those revenue collections under the business privilege tax revenue category above the adopted revenues in here would go towards payment of the other prior year obligations. And in this case, we're proposing that 50% of the excess revenue will be dedicated to paying off the COLA settlement award, the remaining COLA. So any excess revenue under business privilege tax goes to 50% goes to COLA. Yes, yeah. 30% of the excess revenue will be for the payments of the GovGuam Retirement Fund for the Department of Education and Guam Memorial. That's another outstanding note that we have that is being paid. So that 10% would be appropriated to pay principal and interest for prior year obligations to employees that are owed this back pay, basically. There is a report that Department of Administration issues that lists all these past due personnel obligations to employees that have claims and have not been paid. So 10% of that will go to that list. And then 10% will be appropriated for principal and interest of prior obligations to all other claimants by the identified in Chapter 176(7B). And so that would be the business privilege tax excess revenues. And then it sets aside, again, the recognition of that, the recording of the excess revenues, and the administrative reports required in order for the legislature to track those revenues and ensure they're being applied as put forth in this. Senator Argon?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to just commend the committee in terms of the allocation of any excess revenues that are generated as part of the business privilege tax. And just looking at this, I know that there have been several measures that have been adopted by this body that basically would provide resources to try to pay off the subcategory 1. At one time, during the course of the latter part of last year, I believe that figure was at 17 or $15 million. Do we know, based on subsequent legislation that was passed, what that figure may be at this point in time, so that at least we can acknowledge that that's where we need to continue to trim down that obligation on the part of the government of Guam?
Yeah, the outstanding COLA was about $17 million. There was a payment made recently of $2 million from the recouping of the regular COLA payments that was paid by the general fund from the autonomous agencies. And so we're assuming that that's about a $2 million reduction. So we're looking at about maybe 15, somewhere around 15 million of the outstanding.
Yeah, I wanted to ask that because, Mr. Speaker, you did mention about the $2 million, $2.4 million, I believe, or 2.3 that was recently remitted to pay that down. And as long as we continue to understand exactly what the obligation of this government remains, or what the balance is, I think it's notable. Another thing, Mr. Speaker, you did incorporate 30% of these proceeds will be remitted over to the retirement fund for Department of Education and Guam Memorial Hospital employees in terms of allowing them to retire.
Yes.
I think that I need to highlight this. And first of all, thank you for incorporating and including GMH. Only because 2 evenings ago, I had met an individual who apparently had just recently retired from GMH within the last 30 days. And her initial question was, Senator, did they pay my retirement fund so I can receive my annuity within, I believe it was 6 weeks. And then obviously she asked, why does it take 6 weeks to be able to process her retirement annuity? And that's something that we were able to get a confirmation on, that at least in her case, she is fine, but there still remains a certain number of individuals that would like to retire, and they're not going to be able to fully retire until such time that their obligation on the part of GMH is paid off. Just for the benefit of our colleagues here, we all know the challenges financially that GMH continues to experience on an annual basis. I think that when we look at their expenses over prior fiscal years, the last 2 fiscal years alone, they've expended practically every single funds that they've generated on every fiscal year, primarily to take care of obligations, operations, as well as personnel. So that's a facility that has been adjusting their rates on a regular basis, but most importantly, it has resulted in some very good activities in terms of their accreditation, at least for 3 years. But I thank you for incorporating GMH, because I think it's critical that in this case we continue to recognize that and allow these employees to retire, because when they retire, guess what? It allows the agency, whether it be DOE or GMH, to reapply those revenues towards other operational requirements or towards recruiting professionals. Thank you very much, Mr.
Yes, thank you very much, Senator Uggan, and you're right, and there's another section in the bill which would address that outstanding note and kind of restructure that note, because the way that it's structured now, it's a flat payment. It doesn't relate to the outstanding principal, which is just something that presents great strain on the general fund, because the general fund is paying for that. That's another assistance to GMH that is not counted in the appropriation level. So, okay. So that would be Section 7. Section 8 is an income tax refund compensation plan. We're asking Revenue Tax, of course, to and the employees to work harder on these prioritization of the refunds to ensure that we get and maximize the cash reimbursements from the federal government. So this authorizes the implementation of what is currently in statute, which is a merit-based incentive pay for the employees at Rev and Tax in the processing and the accounting of these refunds. So it's not a new program, but it certainly requests that the Director of Revenue and Taxation submit to the legislature and the governor a proposed plan within 30 days to the Speaker and the governor for approval of an incentive and a merit-based program for doing the extra, their job, but definitely doing it more efficiently and with the current resources before they're able to make the additional collections, and then they'll have those resources available to hire additional help and so forth. So it just requires them to submit a plan to the governor to recognize these employees. So that concludes that section. Section 9 is the debt service continuing appropriations. This is what you see in, of course, the other budget bills. These are our bond obligations and our debt obligation. Under A, we have the general bond obligation of 1993, which includes, this is for the school construction. We're coming close to retiring this debt, but we still got a few years left. And that is $2.8 million. The limited obligation highway refunding bond, 2001 series. This is paid out of the liquid fuel tax, so it's $6 million. The Guam Highway Fund, liquid fuel tax. The limited obligation Section 30 bonds. This was the water system revenue bonds and the refunding bond of $9.8 million is the debt service requirement. The short-term financing, these are line of credits that were done, and this is for $1.2 million, and this will retire next year. The limited obligation infrastructure bond, improvement bonds, this is for the Tumon redevelopment, paid out of the Tourist Attraction Fund, and this is a $6.6 million. Senator Ogden?
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just on that particular section, the limited obligation infrastructure improvement bonds with the use of the TAF, it was my understanding, based on recent discussion with legislation, that that figure, that annualized obligation, was reduced from 7.1 to 4.5, but then by virtue of the action of the body last week in one of the legislative measures allowing for the acquisition of USDA proceeds for the Guam Museum, that we've pretty much have tied up the additional resources up to possibly $7 million or 6.6. Now, my question in this, is there any way that we can divide the presentation in this case? Because that was our discussion last week, that in fact that annualized debt service has dropped from previously 7.1 down to like 4.6. I'm sure the Tourist Attraction Fund, the chair of tourism, would have more definitive figures, but those items were part of the discussion during the course of last week. But I just wanted to make a suggestion that perhaps we can divide it so that the actual obligation that is due to this bond is reflected there, and then if by any chance you want to cap it back up to 6.6 or 7.1, the remaining balance, because we have yet to secure those proceeds, even though the Lieutenant Governor or the acting governor at that time, Mike Cruz, had already signed that legislation.
We'll do the research, but my understanding is this is the debt service requirement. This was issued to us basically by GITA on the debt schedules, and that the loan for the museum is not part of this debt service. We reserved in the TAF budget based upon a drawdown schedule given to us by Guam Visitors Authority, and we reserved about $117 million for interest-only payments under the construction phase for the 2011 fiscal year, 117,000, and that the 1.5 million will be reserved in the next fiscal year, because that's not we're not going to make a capital payment or a debt service payment on that, only for the the interest based upon the drawdown schedule.
Okay, I think, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I think you're absolutely right with that. I think that even if we were able to consummate a loan arrangement with USDA for the Guam Museum of $20 to $25 million, that initial payment probably would not be required until 2012.
That's
So I think you're absolutely right. But then I guess it goes back to whether, in fact, that's
Then we'll look at
6.6
that
is- yeah.
on,
Okay.
on that debt service and reconfirm that debt service then.
Okay, this is awesome.
All right. Senator Cruz, did you have a comment?
I was just distracted, Mr. Chairman. I just received an email about an article in the USA Today, and it has something to do with Section 30, but we've already passed it, so I'll just email it to your offices
Okay.
and see if you can address it, because it really concerns me that we may be not receiving our full share
Section 3.
of Section 30, because military pay has increased 84% since 2000, and
We haven't seen that.
since 2000.
I saw that you know, military is attracting individuals with better pay,
But
our
the thing
sec-
is that all the big military towns in the country are now among the
Best.
most affluent
Yeah,
in the states, but our Section 30 hasn't shown an 80% increase since 2000.
yeah. I agree. I saw the article.
Okay.
So, thank you very much. And you're right, that is a question, you know, that we have to ask. So, and that's one of the things that we actually have a little better grasp of this year, is how do they calculate that Section 30? And the more we know, the less we know for sure.
Yes, because in the USA Today article, it says it includes housing as part of the compensation, which is the reason why they're averaging $122,000 a year as compensation.
Yeah,
And so the amount of taxes that should be accruing to us should be a lot more, especially with the high number of officers that we have here
right.
and the professionals that we have here
Yeah.
up at Naval State, up at the hospital and all that.
Yeah, off-base housing was increased for compensation for off-base housing for officers. I think it's $2,450 a month, and for non-officers, it's $2,200 per month, and that was an increase from I think $2,100 and $1,800. So, if housing is part of the compensation they're calculating, I don't think that's being figured in our Section 30 calculation.
So I'm just pointing that out. I'm just hoping that someone could look at that and maybe
yeah,
see if we can increase our Section 30 and maybe get back that $5 million that they're taking away from us, that they said that we.
absolutely. I do, you know, I'm scheduling a trip to Washington to talk with the IRS and the Department of Defense on the issue of EITC once again, and of course Section 30 with this most recent information you're bringing to the attention of the body is certainly something that needs to be re-examined. So thank you very much for bringing that to our attention. Okay. Senator Argun, we will, at your request, take a look at the $6.6 million and make sure that that is the appropriate debt service level. And if there are different components of that debt service to other than just the bond issue, we will then, a motion would be to split that up and identify. Okay, all right. Any objection to that motion? No objections? So the motion would be to split that if there is different components of that 6.6. Okay, the 2008 short-term financing is a line of credit that was authorized under 2969, and the debt service on that is $4.2 million, and the last year of that would be the FY 2012 budget. The general obligation bond 2007 series, which was part of the refunding of the general obligation bond 1993 series, to fund capital improvement projects. This is when we provided some money to the hospital and the schools. I think this refunding was by Senator Calvo. and there will be a $7.8 million bond issue, debt service. The limited obligation, Section 30 bonds, the 2009, this is the landfill bond, basically, and there's a $7.1 million debt service payment. This is the newest, these are the newest obligations we have for this fiscal year. And then, of course, the general obligation bond, in which we provided $112 million for income tax refunds and paid off $92 million in COLA principal amounts. The debt service on that is $23 million. Our grand total debt service for this fiscal year amounts to $67,298.09, which is about close to 80% increase, about 15%, 17% of our total general fund allocation. Senator Ogden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I apologize for asking for just to be able to make a statement. Yesterday when we were discussing briefly about, in my opening statements, about a $23 million general obligation bond, I was really more or less trying to share with yourselves and our viewership that the additional obligation just for this fiscal year in terms of initial payments, you're absolutely right, Mr. Speaker. You said $23 million, but if you look at the total numbers, it's $30.3 million at a minimum. More because the other one is the limited obligation bond of $7.1 million, which is for the Lazon landfill. And I just wanted to clarify the statement or to correct the statement that I made yesterday, because I mentioned 23 when in fact it's an additional $30.3 million that the government now has to take out of its existing revenue base to be able to meet the obligations of the bonds that were floated last year. So thank you very much. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator. And I also wanted to say that the $23 million debt service for those outstanding obligations also were accruing interest. So it's not like we're just, in order to pay them off, we're paying interest. We were paying interest those whether we paid them off incrementally or as part of the bond issue. The debt service increase actually from FY 2010 to 2011 increased by about 73.61%. It went up from, our total debt service for the FY 2010 budget was $38.7 million, and our total debt service in FY 2011 is $67.3 million. So as you know, that really presents a huge challenge for the budget this year to try to keep operations going, keep everyone employed, and ensure that we meet our obligations. So that concludes the discussion on the debt service. We will now go to Chapter 2, which is education. And this is the section that, of course, sets and reserves the amounts for the Guam Department of Education, the University of Guam, Guam Community College. I know the speaker wasn't feeling well, and I'd like to ask that we go ahead and go through the section, but allow that when the speaker returns, that she may be permitted to make any amendments that she may have with regards to this section as chair of the committee. Senator Respicio, can I?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I obviously move that we do that, but just to clarify, only the speaker will be allowed to go back to this section? Is it going to be a general rule that while we're in the committee of the whole, we're not going to be able to go back to chapters that have already been adopted?
Yes,
okay.
That's correct.
Okay, so I move then that as a courtesy to our speaker who has oversight over education, because she's not feeling well at the moment, I move that we still address Chapter 2 education, but that the speaker be the only one permitted to go back if necessary.
Yes.
But I understand that you've been in direct communication over the last several weeks with her staff and her as well to formulate these right. Numbers that are being presented right now.
Thank you very much. Just so that we get some information to the body, there was a committee report that passed out, and in there you have an identification of what occurred during the budget hearings, and some of the information contained that would drive the budget as adopted in this bill. Of course, as we did last year, we took a look at the existing resources available, the current expenditure levels of the department, and where there were opportunity to use the federal assistance in the ARA funding to pay for the obligations and the operations of the Department of Education. As you know, we still have not been able to access the ARA funding to the level that we wish Department of Education would. So there, of the 56, of the over $72 million that was provided for 2010, a large portion of that continues to be available to the Department of Education for this fiscal year. In addition to that, of course, the Department of Education will receive, just recently announced by our Congresswoman, that they will be eligible for another $20 million of direct grant to the department for the expressed purpose of paying for salaries and benefits of the personnel at the Department of Education. That funding source is restricted specifically for salaries and benefits. So the $20 million is not available for operational requirements outside of personnel salaries and benefits. So if you take a look at the budget in here, you will see that there is a decrease in the Department of Education budget of around $20 million. And that would is basically to ensure that we made some of the funding needed for the other departments and agencies to continue their operations, plus, of course, the additional debt service that we had that are obligations of the general fund. And Department of Education's budget was decreased by the amount of grant that is available for use as salaries. And so we didn't take more than what was available. We only shifted then payment of existing personnel for salaries to the $20 million grant, which has been, which will be available according to the Congresswoman based upon their application last year and just a new certification that goes in, and that money should be available to the department. Could be available as early as September, the third week of September, but certainly it won't be dragged out into a new application process. It's part of the approved application process that has been submitted by the Guam Department of Education. So that is the main component in terms of the release. Just real quickly, I see Senator Gutierrez's hands. So the salary category reflects that reduction. Okay. Yeah. So Senator Gutierrez.
Thank you, Senator Pangilinan. Does that ARA money allow the department to hire new employees?
Yes, it allows them to hire new employees as well.
Okay. The reason I ask is I'm a little concerned about the FTEs at the Department of Education. They always seem to hire more and more people and claim they don't have money to operate the department. Have you factored in the FTE issue in their budget? And how have you done that?
Yeah, well, that's exactly why we've reduced the personnel object category appropriation to account so that the $20 million will be available to them to continue their existing FTE schedule, plus those vacancies that are funded that are required because they need them. So it really controls that. Okay. If we didn't do that, then they can do $20 million in new employees.
Yes.
And that's really not the objective.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? For the record, the summary of the base operations for DOE includes increases in supply and material. The The total being awarded this year is about $3 million. So there are some increases in the object category from this current fiscal year for the Department of Education. In addition, of course, the Department of Education will receive in this budget, if you've heard, of course, they're saying that they're concerned about the JFK temporary site. And of course, as we noted yesterday in the budget, that we have included in this budget a $3 million offset against the GRT for a tax credit to be used for payment of the temporary campus at JFK. And that was not included in the submittal of the governor's budget, but we are accounting for that. And so the Department of Education will receive out of the general fund and special fund an appropriation level of $176 million, plus, of course, the ARA grant and the unexpended portion of the ARA grant, which is another 70-some million, 50-some million, plus the additional grant of the Education Jobs Act, which really brings the Department of Education's total resources available for FY 2011 of very close to $276 million, somewhere in that neighborhood, which is, more than adequate, I think, to achieve its mission and educate our children. But a lot of that, of course, is the federal support. Yeah. So that's Section 1, which is the base operation. Section 3 of Chapter 2 is the increments and promotions, and this was submitted by DOE, and that's $1.9 million for increments and the reclassifications for those employees that achieve additional level of expertise by getting their degrees and so forth. The law provides a reclassification for that, and that's being funded. The miscellaneous funding provided to outside of base operations provided to the Guam Department of Education are for programs like the Interscholastic Sports Fund. They're being provided $612,000. 92 of that will fund a busing service for the interscholastic program. The health and physical education activities is being funded for health and physical education program, intramural sports, and this is $279,754. Section 5 allows the department to use the funds reimbursed by the federal government and the ROTC program to be used for the ROTC program. We advance that money. In terms of they reimburse us a portion of the salaries of the instructors, and so that money then is used for travel, uniforms of the members of the ROTC units at the different schools. Senator Ada?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. On the ROTC program, the uniforms for the students are not taken care of by the program itself? That they use this funds also for the...
That's correct. That's what I understand. Like I said, we pay, they reimburse us, they reimburse the department for a portion of the salaries of the instructors. And that's the money then that is used to operate the program. In effect, we are paying because we pay out first for the salaries, they reimburse us the salaries, and then we use the reimbursement for the uniforms, the travel, and other activities that the program has. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Ada. So Section 5 allows the expenditures of those funds. Section 6 is to support to eliminate high-risk status, and $250,000 is appropriated from the indirect cost fund to the Guam DOE for the sole purpose of removing DOE from the high-risk grant status. And the funds are going to be expended in accordance with a statement of pro forma expenditure submitted in writing by the Deputy Superintendent of Finance. We want to get out of this status right away. Once we get out of this status, we can do away with a third-party fiduciary responsibility. So this allows the development of additional systems and personnel at GDOE for that purpose. No amendments, and okay. Section 7. Section 7 is the Guam Department of Education promissory note appropriation. This is the Guam Power Authority note that is owed, and this appropriates $2.4 million from the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund to the utility cost account to pay the Guam Power Authority for that promissory note. So now this becomes, there was a question that they didn't get an appropriation last year and they were using current year operations to pay for this. We realized that, and it wasn't in last year, and this year, to avoid this, if you don't pay your note, we're gonna cut off your power at the schools. This makes it very clear that there's an appropriation and a funding source to pay for that note, and it comes out of the Territorial Educational Facilities Fund. That takes them for the fiscal year 2010. Okay. This is for 2011. Okay. All right, Senator Ogden?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the utility cost account is administered out of DOA?
That's correct.
Okay,
That's
just wanted that clarification. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Senator Barnes is requesting for a short Okay, okay, yeah. All right, okay. So I get no motion for a recess. Okay, all right. Section 8 is the summer school program. The summer school establishes a fee schedule, basically, and is paid out of the operations and the fee schedule. So this allows the Department of Education to expend such sums that are necessary to fund the operations of the 2011 summer school program, and they are appropriated to the Guam Department of Education. The superintendent of GDOE shall submit, of course, a detailed report regarding this, to include the total revenue received, including identification of each revenue source, the expenditures and encumbrances by object category, by school, and the fund balance. Again, this allows them to spend the money that is generated from the fees that the students pay for summer school. It's not it's a self-funding program. Number 9 is the textbooks and collateral material. These are appropriations to the public school system to purchase textbooks, ebook readers, and collateral materials, to include software, sheet music, music boots, in accordance with the following terms. $2 million is appropriated for FY 2011 for that purpose. Again, this is another appropriation to DOE that wasn't in the original submittal. So we are providing this resource to GDOE that was not in the original submittal that was sent down. So this is additional money that we're making available to DOE for this fiscal year, or the upcoming fiscal year. And then the Department of Superintendent of GDOE shall order materials prior to no later than March 1st, 2011, to get them into the next fiscal year. And then the other provisions here are for the posting on the website and ensuring that the information is relayed to the body. So $2 million is the appropriation level. Senator Ogden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just so that I have a better understanding of this, the way I read it is that the superintendent of DOE, through agreements with textbook vendors, shall defer payments for said materials until after October 1st, 2011, but no later than December 31st, 2011. But then they would be required to procure the books by March 11, by March 1st, 2011. So basically, if they're able to procure the books by March 1st, and my understanding, Mr. Speaker, is that in most instances they would request payment up front, unfortunately, because of the relationship at this point in time financially with some of these book vendors. Now, I know you're providing flexibility, but that's... But I do understand what you're doing here, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly have an appreciation for it. It's just that understanding that on March 1st, the books have to be ordered, and in most cases, the vendors are going to request immediate payment, if not 50% up front.
Right.
And then there's the deferment option.
So,
at least it gives
so
the
if the superintendent can convince the textbook companies to ship the books without advance payment, We're going to ask her
Okay,
to
so
do
we're
that.
keeping our fingers crossed.
We're
Thank you,
keeping-
Mr. Speaker.
But the money is available because they are from FY 2011 revenues. They're not, this is not an advance appropriation as we've done in the past, okay? So, but if she can defer the payment to after we receive the books, that would be better. Okay. Thank you very much, Senator Uggan. I'm glad you noticed that part. So, Section 10 is the website posting, of course. On the website, they shall post the following information: payments of prior year obligations, salary adjustments by positions. These are all current required reports to be posted in the cash disbursement schedule that is required, that is worked with the public auditor. There's a statute that said they shall develop a allotment release cash disbursement schedule, their hires and where they're funded from, and then the funded FTEs, the lapses, and so forth. All of this information continues the policy of transparency by this legislative body and by this government to ensure that our citizens know where the money is being spent. Okay. Senator Uggan, did you have a comment on
Yeah,
Section 10?
is there flexibility? I noticed that under reports, under subsection B, 30 days after the fiscal year, superintendent shall provide a copy of the GD1 or the contract of each employee hired to fill any vacancy or new position. Is there any flexibility in terms of providing it in electronically so that at least there's realizable savings? You know, and
Well, no, you might just, an amendment would be in order that they may be provided electronically.
so, Mr. Speaker, if we can go up to line 10 under reports, the superintendent of GDOE shall report, comma, at a minimum, electronically, comma, the following to Magalahian and Guahan and the Speaker of the Legislature in Guam.
Okay.
So at a minimum.
On page 29, chapter 1, line 10, section 11, the line reads, reports. The superintendent of GDOE shall report, and the amendment proposed by Senator Uggan would be put a comma, at a minimum electronically, shall report at a minimum okay, at a minimum, shall yeah. Yeah. Senator Uggan?
Yeah, I think that captures really the intent of the amendment, Mr. Speaker, because we want to try to save a few trees.
All right, so shall electronically report, okay, the following.
Thank you.
All right, so on that amendment to the amendment, no objections? On the main amendment that is amended, no objections? The amendment carries. Okay, thank you very much. The utilities cost reduction incentive, this is a carryover from the last budget, and it allows the principals of the schools who save consumption in their utility by at least 15% from the prior annual billing measured each quarter, that a portion of that be made available to the school for school activities for students and staff. So, and the Section 13 is the transfer authority for the Guam Department of Education may transfer funds from appropriations made within the object class, except that no funds shall be transferred into the personnel services category. This is again a carryover from the previous budget. So that would be the Department of Education. The next part 2 of this is the Education Suruhanu appropriation, and the pretty much a carry forward budget from current operations, and this amounts to 179,514, and you'll see the table there for the appropriation level. So section 1 is the table and the object category contractual services, office rental, supplies and materials, and their telephone are basically the operations other outside of personnel that is funded for this department. Section 2 is the increments. Again, this is in this fashion because like last year, we took and funded the increments, and we made sure that it's broken out and shown in terms of the increments and promotions for the different departments. And then Section 3 of this is the central cost accounts for water and power and the benefits. And so this is a carryover methodology from last year in terms of we pooled all of the health and dental benefits, water, the utility cost account into the account at DOA. By doing this, we were able to really put the pressure off departments and agencies in terms of, having to chase down power payments and so forth. They've worked with DOA and GPA, and they've been able to make this operate smoothly. And what this also allows is the movement of the appropriation from one agency that may use a little bit more this year, in this month and next month, and so it really has allowed DOA to be some flexibility on this. So any amendments or deletions to Chapter 2 of the Education Sorohano? There being none, we will then proceed with Chapter 2, Part 3, which is the Guam Commission for Educator Certification. This is the new Guam Commission for Educator Certification office that was created by this body. The previous educator certification was performed out of the personnel office at the Guam Department of Education. And there was a proposal that was sent down by the governor, addressed by this body and passed by this body that set up a new commission, independent and outside of the Guam Department of Education. They currently have a staff of, I think, three. The appropriation level for their budget this year is $221,194. Once again, salaries and benefits are funded, contractual services, office rental. They're housed at the University of Guam at the moment, supplies and materials, a miscellaneous category. The agency also, or the new commission also generates revenues from payment of fees for these certifications. And by statute, those fees are under the purview of the Education Commission itself. So that's not part of the appropriation support level for operational requirements of the board. So any additions or amendments? There being none, any questions? We will now then proceed to Chapter 2, Part 4, which is the University of Guam. The difference in the appropriation level this year versus last year is last year the legislature funded about $1.8 million in what the University of Guam requested outside of its base operating budget for what they called their growth initiatives last year. And so that was over and above what their current operational requirements was. The idea in funding those growth initiatives was to jumpstart some of these initiatives by the University of Guam so that in their presentation, we give them some seed money, they go out, they get grants and endowments to support then these new programs. And so because of the just the condition of the additional resources required for the other departments and agencies, we did not refund those, and it wasn't our intention to continue to fund that as part of their base. So their base operation this year is $27,202,620 to support 208,620. Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you very much. For the fiscal year 2011. The federal matching grants and aid amounts to 1.5 million for the University of Guam. The other appropriations are for the scholarship programs that are funded. 2.5 million is appropriated for the Merit Award, the Student Loan, Nurse Training Program, Professional and Technical Awards, the ROTC Program, the Regent Scholarship, Marine Lab Graduate Assistance Program, Early High School Admissions Program, Doc Sanchez Program, John F. Kwan Memorial Scholarship Program, and the administration of the financial assistance programs. And the University of Guam President shall allocate this appropriation in order to fund said scholarships, financial assistance program, and program administration, subject to 1513. These are all at the level that were submitted by the University of Guam. There was no adjustment because of some adjustments that that this body made in the stipends of some of these programs. While the adjustments to the stipends for the new recipients were made, the result of that adjustment is that we're able to give more scholarships. More individuals will be able to be assisted with new scholarships, but we are not reducing those students that have stipend schedule under the old that are grandfathered in. And then, of course, we continue to recognize the nurse training program and the needed resources. So we are allocating no less than $500,000 to the nursing program, and the Doc Sanchez program shall receive no less than $300,000 of the appropriations herein. And then the other sections of that is the new adopted stipend schedule for the new students for the nursing and the merit awards, which are granted stipends. And then the additional appropriation of 1.238127 is made to the Antonio C. Yamashita Education Corps, and this is basically our teacher training program, and that's the amount that was again requested by the University of Guam based upon their current enrollment. And so again, the stipend schedule has been changed for incoming program. And so that is the scholarships, financial assistance program, and program administration for the University of Guam, administered by the University of Guam, given on behalf of the people of Guam by this legislative body. Any changes or amendments? There being none. The Section 4 of the appropriations for programs at the University of Guam is for the Aquaculture Development and Training Center. This is the hatchery program in which the University of Guam does research and develops aquaculture brood stock that they're able to help support their operations, and $131,846 is appropriated for fiscal year 2011 for the continued operations of that Fidian hatchery as we all know it by. Senator Ogden?
You know, I have to admit, Mr. Speaker, having overseen this particular entity at one point in time, it's a wonderful facility that's supporting a number of our farmers. But the concept that was shared many years ago, if you recall, maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, when this particular entity was transferred from the Department of Commerce over to the University of Guam, was that eventually it would transition out in terms of receiving funding support from the government of Guam, from the general fund. So I guess in line with that, I can discuss it with some of the representatives to look at what their funding levels are internally, because one of the things that they've done is they can generate revenues internally by the sale of the brood stock and whatnot, the shrimp and some of the live larvae to many of our farmers. But the question then again is it sufficient? The demand sufficient to be able to sustain the operation and to help it to expand? So I take it that by virtue of the appropriation, the answer is no for this upcoming fiscal year, but I certainly hope that over the upcoming years that there's greater effort in terms of trying to see if this entity can be self-sustaining. And there are a lot of different options. And you know that, Mr. Speaker. I mean, There were a number of business offers that were extended that the facility will continue to be utilized as a research facility under the guise of the University of Guam, but that it could be in a cooperative arrangement with the private enterprise. And I think that perhaps there could be that possibility down the road. But I just wanted to share that perspective because I continue to see these appropriations on an annual basis, and I guess that original goal or objective has not been attained yet.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I certainly agree with you in that statement, and hopefully the University of Guam representatives are listening, and the new president there would understand that we are requesting that he kind of re-examine this facility and develop a strategic plan to move this facility and program to a more self-sustaining basis. So, thank you very much, Senator Ogden. Section 5 is an appropriation, again, that is a carryover appropriation from previous years to continue support for WERI's Guam hydrological study and $192,305. And this, of course, goes to the Water and Environmental Research Institute for the hydrological study, and it's really important that we continue to support this. Hopefully one day we'll move this appropriation out of the general fund over to GWA when they get into a better shape, because really the information being provided to them is really very much more critical and appropriate for that use. And so we've been looking at this, and we're trying to have additional discussions with GWA and the CCU to see if they could take over this support for this such study, because it really fits with their mission and it meets their needs in terms of the setting of. We were supporting this when GWA and PUAG was a line agency, because the determination of water policy basically came out of this legislative body. Now that the water policy is basically controlled by CCU and GWA, this program supports the development of appropriate water policy, and perhaps we can move this out of the general fund over to that agency for their use. And then Section 6 is another appropriation for the Comprehensive Water Resource Monitoring Program. And once again, this really benefits the Guam Water Authority and the CCU as they take a look at the water requirements of the entire island, and they make those determinations at this time. And once again, we're going to have discussions with them and seeing if this is something that's more appropriate for them to work with the University of Guam to support the WERI for this purpose. So that's an appropriation level. Again, these are carryover appropriations that have been funded out of the general fund by this body in previous budgets. Section 7 is the Soil and Water Conservation Program to the University of Guam. This is a program that's basically provided support by the University of Guam, run by the board there, and this appropriates money for their operations. This also allows the board to actually secure additional federal grants for support of the farmer services by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So there's a northern water conservation district and a southern water conservation district. And both of these entities are able to assist farmers in farm management and those kind of programs, in addition to assisting them with getting additional federal grants to advance farming activity and agricultural industry on Guam. And this is, again, housed at the University of Guam and supported out of there. Section 8 is the appropriation for KPRG, Public Radio. Again, another appropriation that carries forward from previous fiscal years, and this is the legislature's support through the University of Guam for public radio. So any amendments? None. The appropriation to the University of Guam under Section 9 is from the Tourist Attraction Fund for the Rhinoceros Beetle Program. University of Guam is intimately involved in the eradication plan for the rhinoceros beetle, and we continue to support that. And the GVV board had allocated this money also to assist the University of Guam to continue the program for the control and, of course, eventual eradication of the rhinoceros beetle that's attacking our coconut trees on the island and places them in jeopardy. So, no additions or deletions. Section 10 is to the Guampedia Foundation. Again, this is sent to the University of Guam. The University of Guam provides them with a space to work out of, Dean's Circle, and this is your online encyclopedia about Guam. And again, this is an allocation out of the Tourist Attraction Fund that was requested and is being proposed and approved. No additional deletions. Section 11 is the Capital Improvement Fund continuing appropriation. This appropriation of $500,000 is from the Guam Highway Fund, and this is to support the portion of the debt service for the construction of the Jesus and Huenya School of Building for the School of Business. And this is a support given to the University of Guam that was passed by this body, and it is part of our commitment to the debt service on that. Senator Ogden?
Just a quick question, Mr. Speaker. I know that the allocation of these proceeds is, you're incorporating this in here so that in fact we understand that it's an appropriation.
That's correct.
But wasn't there a continuous appropriation mechanism that was created as a result of the loan?
That's right.
Okay.
So we are appropriating it every year and showing that it's going to the
Now,
University.
would that be necessary in terms of how the obligation was set up?
Yes, it's,
Okay, because obviously, to me, the way I look at it, it's double appropriation in terms, not double the amount,
right.
but doubly codifying the appropriation.
Two
in terms of
appropriations.
is hereby continuous appropriation on an annualized basis to meet this debt service, and then we're appropriating it again. Okay, thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much. And we'll make sure that is the legally sufficient in this bill. So, yeah. Section 12 is program revenue and expenditure reports that will be required out of the University of Guam. And all of these miscellaneous appropriations would require that these programs submit reports to the governor and to the legislature. And again, this is a carryover requirement for accountability and transparency. Section 13 are the program annual reports. The University of Guam president, again, this is a administrative requirement that has been from previous budgets and continues in terms of ensuring accountability and transparency, that they shall be posted on the website and they shall be submitted to Imagalahinguan and the Speaker of the Legislature for these programs that are funded. So it requires the revenue and expenditure report, and it requires a program report to be filed. Section 14 are the scholarship, financial assistance, and other reports. And again, this is at the end of the fiscal year 2010. The President shall report to the Magalahinguan and the Speaker and post on the University of website the expenditures and the awards and information of the allocation of the scholarship programs and so forth. So, Section 15 is the appropriation to the Guam Cancer Registry. This is a new appropriation that was funded out of the increase in the tobacco tax that was set up by, as a virtue of the increase in the tax. There were programs that were funded and created and funded by the author of that, Senator B.J. Cruz, and so based upon the formula in the budget, in the enabling legislation, there is support for the Guam Cancer Registry, and based upon the projected revenues of that, $202,000 of that would go to the Cancer Registry to the University of Guam for the cancer registry pursuant to the statute that sets up a cancer registry. So this provides additional resources to that program. We need to continue to build our database on cancer as we continue to push both the military as well as our own government in the cleanup of these toxic waste sites and the effects that these have on our people. We always say that we have the highest increase in cancers, and we need to quantify that. It also helps, the cancer registry will help our veterans that get identified with them. So the information is really critical as we continue to seek support to help our people who are afflicted with this disease. And this information will be critical, and this additional resource will certainly be more than helpful. Section 16 is the appropriation to the Guam Cancer Trust, and this goes to the University of Guam for the administration of the Guam Cancer Trust Fund. Pursuant again to the statute that created the fund at the University of Guam, it allows the University of Guam to work with community organizations in outreach program, counseling programs, cancer screening, treatment, and support. And then the Section 17 is the administrative transfer authority to the University of Guam. Again, these are carryover provisions, and they operate in the same manner as the previous budgets, in which the University of Guam president gets some transfer in and out of operations for their scholarship programs to move them around so that if you get more applicants in one and less in the other, you can continue to support the scholarship applicants. Section 18 is the continuing appropriations to the Guam Department of Education, the Student Financial Assistance Program, the Dr. Antonio Yamashita Education Corps, the University and GCC for fiscal year 2010 shall not lapse and shall continue into 2011. And again, this is a continuing appropriation. Senator Palacios.
Just a question here. I mean, this is, of course, under Chapter 4, under Part 4, and I don't understand why Section 18, which pertains to DOE and GCC, is under Part 4, which is UOG. I mean, probably there's no error, but it's under the heading Part 4, University of Guam, and then you have Section 18, a continuing appropriation. Maybe it should reflect under the respective section part. I don't know.
I think this was referring to last year. Yeah, this was a carryover from last year's budget, and so the way we'll reconcile this, and this should only be applicable to the University of Guam.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So the
But no
proposed
problem.
amendment
It's
is
just
to.
I'm just thinking.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Understood, Senator Palacios. We'll reconcile the language. Okay. The next chapter or part of Chapter 2, which is Chapter 5, the Guam Community, Part 5, Guam Community College. The appropriations made to the Guam Community College reflects an increase in the nursing vocational LPN program. That's generally we've increased the funding for that program. We've also, of course, increased the Manpower Development Fund, which increases the allocation to the Guam Community College. We also made the amendment last year and continues it this year in that after funding the apprenticeship program, because of the large increase in the Manpower Development Fund, and it's a percentage basis on the allocation to Department of Labor and GCC, it goes to the apprenticeship program. And so this year, the increased funding will go towards funding the apprenticeship program. And if all of the requirements of the apprenticeship program itself is met, then the additional money that they have can be reprogrammed by the board to meet other programs at the college. So this gives them, again, flexibility for additional resources beyond what was given in the past because of the increase in the Manpower Development Fund. So the general fund appropriation for the Guam Community College totals $12.8 million, $841,257, for fiscal year 2011. And again, this continues the appropriation levels for existing programs at the college, in addition to increasing the manpower development and the nursing vocational LPN appropriation level. And that is the 742,000 that you see is an increase from last year. The other appropriations for specific programs at the college, under C is the Pro Start program, and this is the program for the culinary program that allows the support of that program. It allows them for competition off island and things like that. So that's an additional support that the legislature provides to the Guam Community College. D is the apprenticeship program itself, and this is the funding that comes out of the Manpower Development Fund. And this year, based upon the increased revenue projections, they will get $3.5 million. Last year, I think they got about the same last year under this program. But again, the apprenticeship program itself, based upon the student enrollment, is less than the $3.5 million. So there is additional resources there to support other programs as determined by the board.
It actually increased by about 500.
Yeah, right. Last year, the allocation to the Guam Community College under this program was, I think, $2.5 million. So that's an additional $500,000. And then, of course, the reports, the president of the community, yes?
I'm sorry, are you saying 3.5 or 3.05?
3.05, yes, correct. Thank you very much. The report requirements, of course, is that they shall submit their reports to Magalanguan and the speaker within 30 days. And they shall include the program participants in each of the categories, the expenditures of the appropriations contained in this act, and the additional operational requirements such as the academic courses offered and requirements for participation. So no change or amendments to the Part 5 Guam Community College. If not, we'll proceed then to the miscellaneous provision under the Chapter 2 of this, which would be Part 6. We again continue the requirement for the purchasing and the economics of scale, and reiterate that we're asking the agencies to cooperate to reduce costs for purchasing supplies, materials, to realize the economics of scale. And this is a continuing provision in this budget that was first put in place in the previous budget by Senator Munya Barnes, and we continue that policy. Section 2 is the local funds reimbursement. Funds appropriated to the Department of Education shall not be used to pay for federally funded program activities and expenditures unless such payment is specifically authorized by Guam statute, or unless such payment is made pursuant to the grant requirements. And we're requiring the superintendent of DOE to report to the legislature, Magalanguan, the Office of Public Accountability, all local funds expended in FY 2011 for federally funded programs, to make sure, once again, that they get reimbursed back to the correct category. And this is a continuing provision, again, from the previous budgets. So, no amendments, or Senator Arman.
You know, Mr. Speaker, in the discussion with the Department of Education allocation, your office did a great job in terms of incorporating the ARA and additional federal funds. I noticed that with UOG, I believe that they're anticipating to receive a $17 million ARA funding support for facility expansion and whatnot. And GCC may be somewhere in the same neighborhood. Is there any way that language can also be incorporated into these two, so that it's recognized that in conjunction with the local support, that the University of Guam, as well as Guam Community College, will also receive resources above and beyond?
We will do that.
Please.
We'll take that as an amendment to incorporate the ARA funding wherever it's available in the specific department, agency, or branch, or semi-autonomous agency that receives that. So there is a complete picture,
Yes.
As you mentioned, of what's available to these departments and agencies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. And on that amendment, or that motion carries, and we will do that and make those changes. Chapter 3 is health. And Part 1 is the Guam Memorial Hospital. The intent outlines the change that's being proposed and the reason for that proposed and the results of that. And so that's the change in the pharmaceutical fund in the allocation of the credits. Section 2 is the operative language. Section 2 amends the percentage for all business privilege tax collected to be deposited to the pharmaceutical fund from 6.19 to 4%. And again, this amendment is being made at the request of the Board of Trustees of the Guam Memorial Hospital. So any amendment or deletion to Section 2? If not, Section 3 then is continues the change in terms of the applicable statutes. And then this, in the previous policy, 100% of the credit or of the pharmaceutical fund is credited against MIP billings, so that they get the pharmaceutical fund and MIP gets to offset what they owe the hospital 100%, the entire 12 million. Or whatever percentage number that is based upon 6% of the gross receipts. This now reduced that credit to 25%, so that 25% of the pharmaceutical fund will be credited against MIP, and then MIP is then required to pay cash for the rest of the services that it provides to the hospital. So we reduce the credit and increase the cash payments out of the MIP fund by 75%, basically. And then at the end of the fiscal year, any funds remain, and then so 25% is towards the payment of the MIP recipients, and then the balance of that is applied to the Medicaid program. That previously was all just MIP. This year it's Medicaid, includes the Medicaid program. And then at the end of the fiscal year, the hospital again was very concerned about the continued statements on its books of these charity cases of those people that you can't turn away and they can't pay. And the hospital needs to account for that in the revenue stream. And so this allows then the pharmaceutical fund to be credited against the charity case. And this improves the financial statement of the hospital authority, because now they have a funding source for that non-paid services before that was just continued to be classified. And so this allows them to do that and develop a policy of how and which patients under charity cases get their bills credited against, and so forth. We didn't want to, we wanted to be specific that it wasn't just for non-paying, it was for these charity cases, because sometimes you have individuals who have insurance and then they're not paying their copay. That's not charity case. The hospital can continue to pursue those people. And so that's the change again. So any changes or amendments to Section 3? Senator Uggan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's not more or less a change in amendment. I'm just looking at the numbers so that at least the general public and the viewership understands exactly what the overall equation looks like for GMH. With the exception of discussing the subsequent sections, because I think that in that particular case is self-explanatory. Now, based on the new formula that's being applied, there's possibly in excess of $8 million that will be utilized or redirected for the pharmaceutical funds, of which 25% will be readily available to offset MIP payments and obligations with public health, with the Department of Public Health. So about $2 million will go to public health to take care of MIP payments. So that would free up $6 million out of that 8 to be utilized for Medicaid purposes and other operational requirements at GMH.
Correct.
Okay, and then obviously just adding all the other numbers that you're going to come discuss with the other sections. I guess the underlying message here, Mr. Speaker, if I may, is just assuring the public that in this fiscal year, GMH received $12.8 million in pharmaceutical proceeds from the business privilege tax. In this fiscal year, under that pharmaceutical formula now that has been adjusted to 4%, they will receive $8 million, but there are other mechanisms that are in play that would allow for GMH to receive in excess of $12.8 million in cash payments or offset obligations over the course of fiscal year 11. And I think that really has to be underscored in terms of making sure the community understands that yes, GMH has attained accreditation. GMH continues to receive support from the Finance Committee and from this legislative body in terms of understanding the financial requirements of their operations. But just as importantly, additional resources by the formula that is being applied now could conceivably reach GMH so that it will offset and assist them, provide that financial support in their operational requirements. So I just wanted to highlight that, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Senator Ogden. And Senator Ogden, the other sections, when we look at them as we go through them, will ensure and guarantee that GMH in cash will receive above the old formula and the old process. And again, this is something that the Guam Memorial Hospital worked at, and we discussed as well as yourself. And this is at their request, and the way we structured it was we made sure that in no case will they receive less than what they would have under the old formula. So Section 4 requires then that because of the reduction in the credit, that no less than the 2.5 million, which is the reduction in the credit, no less than 2,023,759 of MIP services provided by the hospital to MIP will result in a payment out of the MIP fund itself. So now you've got a cash payment out of MIP to the hospital for services provided, where before they were just taking it as a credit on the pharmaceuticals fund. So that's above that. So that's the number. Section 5 is the appropriation of that formula itself. The new 4% would be that $8 million. Section 6 is a $2.5 million, $2.435707, and this is additional and new money in this fiscal year that comes out of the Healthy Futures Fund based upon the formula done by Senator B.J. Cruz when he proposed the increase of the tobacco tax, that a portion of that will go to support GMH. So this is an additional $2.4 million that is being made available by that enactment of that statute. And the next section B of this is something that was proposed by yourself, Senator Ogden, as chairman of that. And this is probably one of the more I'm trying to find the right word. The greater flexibility and greater capacity of GMH to address critical needs, because currently GMH has by statute a line of credit authority where they can go out and borrow $12 million on the spot to meet whatever they need, critical needs. You know, the generator breaks down, you can't risk patient care, you need $100,000, $300,000, $500,000 to repair it. They don't have the cash, they can go out and draw on a line of credit. Problem is, they had no way to pay that back other than their current operations, which is short. So this dedicates $1 million out of the Healthy Futures Fund every year for payment every time they exercise that line of credit. And it continues to build up into their account every single year. So they actually, if they don't need anything in an emergency, they have that $1 million that stays there. Next year it gets another $1 million. So they may not even have to draw on the line of credit if this builds up enough and their cash flow is good enough. But it gives them access up to about that $12 million on a critical and emergency basis. So this is something that I think is going to tremendously assist the hospital in meeting its financial requirements for operations. And this is by statute and will occur every year. So that is the section on health with regards to Guam Memorial Hospital. Chapter 3, health, part 2, is the Department of Public Health and Social Services. Senator Ogden.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. In light of talking about GMH, there's one other anticipation, because we had discussed previously about funding that's going to be utilized in fiscal year 11 with regards to GMH or to the other agencies. I think it's only proper that we also identified that through your efforts, Mr. Speaker, in terms of the floating of the general obligation bond, that last July, $11 million of that was set aside specifically for capital improvement projects up at GMH, of which the RFP has been let out, should be closed by the close of this calendar year, of which an additional 4 to 6 beds will be, the intensive care unit will be expanded to accommodate an additional 4 to 6 beds just in the intensive care unit alone. And then some of those proceeds are going to be utilized specifically to expand the emergency room accommodations for individuals who are coming in. So that in fiscal year 11 will be expended out of GMH's funding allocation from the bond that was floated last year, or the proceeds that were received last year,
Right.
$11 million to expand the intensive care unit as well as to expand the emergency room. And I think that had to be noted so that we also recognize that that's another funding mechanism that will be utilized or available to GMH. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. The new section at Department of Public Health, Part 2, Section 1 again, identifies the intent of the legislature to continue and increase funding levels in certain areas, such as the community health centers, and so there is an increase there. And again, this is to continue the professional physician services and other health professionals that were funded by ARA and have expired, but we are continuing funding that and making that available. Just for the record, there were no cuts made to the Department of Public Health's requests, but rather an increase, again, to the community health centers from the Healthy Futures Fund. And in addition to that, we also funded additional vacancies within the department and continue the resources available to those departments. We had to go a little above the budget ceiling submitted, but we decided that was needed. Senator Cruz, I see.
I ask this question every year because you didn't increase their request for MIP. Is this 13 going to be sufficient?
This is,
They got the whole, 15.8 million, part of it's from the Healthy Futures Fund.
yeah. There's a, thanks to your agreement, we funded, there's an additional $2.5 million available for MIP, so the total available is about 15, and that's when we, from that Cancer Trust Fund, that we moved that. So this is the general fund appropriation, and then plus 2.5 from the Cancer Trust Fund, Healthy Futures Fund.
But will the 15 be sufficient? I mean, it always seems they owe me dinner in Paris because every year they keep telling me that 13 or 15 is going to be sufficient. We've always gone over 16.
I know, but this year, I think you're only going to get to New York. This year, you're only going to get to New York, not Paris. That's, you know, when, I tell you, we struggled to find that additional resource, and we did.
No, I
you.
understand. I just wanted to record my annual.
Yeah, pretty soon, they're not going to owe you dinner at all.
Okay.
Okay, this year it's just in New York. By the way, just for the record, when the governor submitted the budget and the revenue level was at 585, he only requested 15 for MIP. So at a revenue level of 535, this legislative body recognizes the priority of that, and we still funded it at the level of $15 million. So we've really bent over backwards to provide them with that request.
15.8.
Yeah.
It's
Almost $16 million, $15.8 million. So, thank you very much, Senator Cruz. And this year, I may pay for your dinner if we go over 16. Okay. The appropriation level is as outlined in the base operation requirements that you see from all combined sources of general fund and special funds. The total appropriation for Department of Public Health is 39.834218. And again, that was based upon their submittal. If you include the federal matching grant and aids, and this is for Medicaid, program. The total revenues and resources available for the Department of Education totals $64,866,146. Once again, if you'll see in Section 3, we break out the increments and promotions in their object category. And Section 4 are agency expended to the central cost account. This is the utility pool and the health benefit cost pool. And again, this is broken out because of we're pooling these funds. Section 5 is the public assistance program payments. These are continuing appropriations for these specific programs, and this is $3.4 million of their base operating appropriation is authorized for the local match for grant and aids for the public assistance program payments, and this is the administration side for FY 2011, and $9,619,223 is authorized then from the federal matching grant and aid. So we're putting up $3 million and we're receiving that $9 million in matching. Section 6 is the MIP program as discussed by Senator Cruz. 13 million of this will come from the general fund, and 2.5 million will come from the increase in the tobacco taxes out of the Guam Cancer Trust Fund for cancer screening and support services of MIP recipients. Senator Palacios and Senator Agan.
Actually, under the summary of base operation, I don't know whether it's identified under contractual or equipment or miscellaneous for some, I think, a small van for the transport of senior citizens for the senior citizen program. I think they have brought to our attention, definitely my attention, of some of the needs for, I guess, newer vans to be in compliance, of course, with ADA. So I don't know the details, whether they have included at least two. I know that they need at the minimum two. Because they service the Manamco for transportation from their residents to their needs. That is the program right now under the Senior Citizens Division.
I'll look at that, Senator Palacios, and I'll get back to you on that.
Yes, please.
And we'll leave that as a question open for resolution and possible.
So that maybe we can just specifically note somewhere, at least.
Okay.
And I'll communicate with you later about that, and I'll confirm with the Division of Senior Citizen anyway.
All right.
Okay. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very
Chairman.
much. Okay. Section 7 is the Medicaid program, and $15,454,000 of the base operational budget, and that's under the miscellaneous category. That's where that number is reflected. Is authorized for the federal grant, matching grant and aid for public health for fiscal year 2011. In addition to this amount, of course, we have the credit now from the pharmaceutical fund at the hospital. They're able to use that as a contribution to the federal matching grant and aid. So in addition to this amount, the credit's there, and they'll be able to, we believe, access the increase in Medicaid, the increase in the Medicaid grant that's made available to the territories will be able to be used for that that additional federal funding. So that change in the hospital pharmaceutical fund will also benefit the Medicaid program. Senator Uggan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just so I can yield to the good Vice Speaker, I'm sure he's concerned that I'm talking too much. But in this particular case, just as it deals with health, just a couple of items. With the previous section, if I may, Mr. Speaker, you look at MIP, the $13.3 million is appropriated, and then the 2.5, so you look at 15.8. And then if we're looking in totality for the MIP obligations and payments for fiscal year 11, we need to go back to GMH and incorporate in totality the $2 million that would be offset by the pharmaceutical fund. So we're talking about $17.8 million just for fiscal year 11 for MIP. Now with the Medicaid, there's two factors that come into play, and Mr. Speaker, you did mention it a little earlier about the increased funding opportunity under Medicaid that was recently enacted by Congress and signed by the President of an additional possibly $2+ million that would be available to the local community. Also on July 1st of calendar year 11, the formula would be adjusted to reflect, rather than a 50-50 match, it will be adjusted to reflect that the federal government would consume 55% of all the Medicaid recognized obligations, and then the local community, in this case Guam, would consume 45. So I think that if we look at the entire scenario, the 15.4 that you're allocating here and what you mentioned about GMH, the funding allocation from GMH to offset Medicaid, and then we're looking at those two factors, the increase to $2+ million for Medicaid funding for Guam, and then the change in the formula to 55% for the U.S. government to be able to assume that obligation. I think it bodes well in terms of the allocation that is provided here, and it's certainly more than sufficient to be able to meet our Medicaid at least matching requirements so that we can try to support as many of our people as possible. So I just want to thank you and your committee for putting forward this formula and making sure that we address those two factors. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, and actually, thank you very much, Senator Uggan, because that increase in that the federal portion of it certainly is going to be going a long way towards relief some of the pressure on that Medicaid program as we continue to move forward. Section 8 are the medicines and vacant positions for the Department of Public Health community health centers. More and more people are availing themselves of the services of the community health centers, even those with insurance. You'll see some of them going to these community health centers now that we have, and we're expanding. This year, the Southern Regional Community Health Center will expand, extra capacity there. You know, Ms. Linda DeNorsi continues to be very aggressive and successful, more importantly successful in finding grants and opportunities to support the community health center. The board intimately involved in the operations of that, and so this ensures then and provides additional help, and this is the increase to the community health centers from the Healthy Futures Fund of $760,731, and 431 of that would be for the purchase of medicine, and then 389 are for the salaries of the providers that are there working now, who we now need to pick up their salary because of the expiration of the ARA grant. So that's Section 8. Section 9 is, again, a continuing appropriation that we do every year for the Medicaid Part D program. And this is allows the Department of Public Health under Medicaid to pay for the Part D program for drugs, basically, that are available for the participants. And this assists, again, the participants and the department in dealing with that cost. These are all the amounts that were submitted by the governor and the department. Section 10 is the Department of Public Health and Social Services carryover authorizations, and it allows them to spend the special funds and general fund carryover for FY 2010 into 2011. This is especially important for the Department of Public Health because of the lag time in the bills that they receive in the fiscal years. You'll get a bill that was rendered in April, and they get it in October, November sometimes, and this ensures that they can pay that bill. So that concludes the discussion on the Department of Public Health. Department of Mental Health is allocated in Part 3 of Chapter 3, and there is an increased funding in the Department of Mental Health by about 26% from the current FY 2011 level for medical personnel. We've continued to fund. They need additional personnel. They've identified those funding levels, and we funded those vacancies to an increase of 26% from in their request. The Ifamagunta program is now embedded in the Child Adolescent Services Division, but in here we are very clear that it is our intent to fund out of the appropriation, no less than $1.4 million for the operation of the Child Adolescent Services Division and Ifamagonta program. So it is in their base budget. It is clear in the intent that that is the Ifamagonta program is being funded by this bill. So the total operating costs for their base operation is 11.85, and this includes of the $11.8 million, $5 million is funded out of the special fund, which is the Healthy Future Fund by statutes again and by allocation. And general fund support is $6.8 million. There is special pay for some of the positions at the Department of Mental Health, and that is delineated in Section 4. Section 5, again, is the breakout of the health benefits and utility cost pool amount. Section 6 is the detoxification. Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Tidegway, I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'm trying to get someone here to put my computer up because I have some notes with regards to mental health that should be coming shortly. So I'd like to have the opportunity to reserve to go back to mental health because I can't seem to have the
All right.
my thing wasn't working. But you know, in Section 3, I just make sure that down below where it says Healthy Future Funds 7,309, it has another comma there. So it's
okay.
I'm pretty sure that's just a
Yes. All right.
typographical error right there with respect to that. As you go further down into that, this is in regards to well, I like to say it's permanent injunction, but really it's like a receivership with regards to mental health is concerned. And my notes will explain some of the probable future expenses with regards to that. And whether we address that here or address it later on with regards to an excess of any taxes or being put in. But I know, Mr. Chair, you're very well aware of what's going on at mental health, and looking at it, it's kind of scary thinking that all of a sudden the judge may require us right off the bat to take $25 million and put it in a bank account, somewhat like what's happening with the landfill situation, and that may happen. But if I could reserve the,
Yes.
I'm still waiting for the technical,
Sure.
the IT gentleman to come and fix this. But thank you, Mr.
All right. Thank you very much, Senator Tidegway. We'll come back to Senator Tidegway when she resolves the technology glitch there. Again, Section 5 was the cost pool. Section 6 is this is basically the program for the appropriation for the outsourcing of drug and alcohol detoxification, rehabilitation, and prevention services that the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse outsources. This is for Salvation Army, Oasis Center, and the Lighthouse, that's correct, the Salvation Army Lighthouse program. So this is the dollars reserved for those programs. Section 7 is the reappropriation of unexpended and unencumbered appropriations to the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse for the amended comprehensive program. We've been looking at trying to find those resources, and one of the, this appropriation is not a new appropriation, it's a redirection of an existing appropriation that was not encumbered or expended, that was originally made to the department, to Guam Memorial Hospital for radiation therapy. Radiation therapy is now being provided, of course, by the private sector, and the hospital did not, even with the appropriation, decided not to pursue that program of purchasing machines and so forth. They're still evaluating for where they're going to go. So there's an appropriation sitting out there, and so this would redirect that appropriation of $2 million, make it available to the Department of Mental Health for costs associated with the permanent injunction program. So that's where we're finding the allocation of that. It's not 25 million, it's 2 million. And the proposal, the number that's being thrown out of this 25 million by the federal management team is a need for hiring new personnel, constructing a brand-new building, and other program. The plan that they're proposing needs to be approved by the federal district court judge. I think they're going before the judge next month. So we don't know what that number is. We don't know what will be ordered by the judge and how it will be structured. So in anticipation of that, we are at least putting and redirecting this appropriation to make available to them. And then based upon the final decision of the judge and how they want to structure that, we'll have to deal with that at a later time.
When it comes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. If I could just go back to Section 6
Sure.
with the appropriation of $883,200 regarding several nonprofit organizations that
That's
are
correct.
okay. This amount is basically how much is determined to go to what agency, like Salvation Army, Lighthouse, Oasis, other departments and agencies. There's not a breakdown here that.
No, because they usually go out with a request for a proposal. This is based upon the past experience of what the costs are for those different programs. And so we usually don't appropriate, the policy was changed by this body to just appropriate it to the agency, and the agency works it out through the request for proposal process. So it'll allocate it depending on the amounts proposed by these different organizations.
And Mr. Chair, if I'm not mistaken, the Section 7 where the $2 million is at, this will also give the federal management team the ability to also use some of that funds to fund Section 6 as well, if I'm not mistaken, or because
It'll depend on
go ahead.
what the judge, what services are covered by the amended permanent injunction. So
It can change.
those are psychiatric services, living,
There's quite a bit with that,
So
with regards,
the-
but may I ask,
the
Mr.
federal
Chair?
management team is not running the entire Department of Mental Health. They're running a portion of the services that are covered under the amended permanent injunction. And that is the living environment, the basic intent of the amended permanent injunction is that we can't confine individuals in institutions in contrary to the Olmstead ruling of the Supreme Court for individuals with disabilities. And the way that some of the programs are being run and the provision of services for these individuals does not meet the conditions of Olmstead. And that is what the judge has ordered the federal receiver, was to work with mental health and put in the programs that conform to the requirements of Olmstead. And these are for even things that rehabilitation therapy, social interaction, psychiatric services, occupational therapy. They have to be provided in a setting that's not an institution. And they have worked out and drafted up this plan, including initial proposal of 118 new people over and above existing staff to provide these services. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, a lot of these nonprofit organizations are able to help comply with the, the mandates that the judge is looking forward to improving the situation at mental health. And the Section 6, what was the request from Department of Mental Health with regards to funding this area?
This is the amount.
This is amount there,
Yes,
question?
this is the amount.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Senator Cruz?
And just to further clarify that, when we first started this appropriation 4 years ago, it was $600,000. So this is almost a 50% increase, and I want to thank the committee for recognizing that. In fact, I was going to suggest that if need be, that some of the money be taken from the Healthy Futures Fund, because that really is an appropriate use for the Healthy Futures Fund. But I want to thank the committee for the full allocation of the request.
We continue to try. Thank you very much, Senator Cruz. Okay. Chapter 3, Part 4 is the DICIT appropriation. Again, DICIT is not part of the permanent injunction, but part of the permanent injunction in that some of their clients are covered by the permanent injunction. And so they're kind of out there with regards to the permanent injunction, but are affected by it. What you've seen in terms of the object category, and if you look at previous budgets for this, you'll see a reduction because we've actually, the governor actually, has moved some of the positions out of DICIT into mental health to support the permanent injunction of clients, of DICIT clients that go and receive services from mental health. So don't be alarmed if you see a decrease in the local funding side. Most of the funding, of course, for DICIT is in their contractual services for for services provided to clients, most especially under DVR and so forth. So this is the funding level that was requested. Total funding, including federal matching grant and aid, of $4.7 million for the department. And so that is the DICIT budget level being proposed. It's still what we've done is we've actually provided additional funding under the local portion under miscellaneous to match these federal monies that they return every year. So we know that they say, we return this money, and we say, why are you returning this federal money? And their excuse in the past was we don't have the local match. So we've increased that amount in the contractual, in the miscellaneous category, so that they can actually have access to that to use to access additional DVR money. That's where we really have been returning a lot of money to the federal government under DICIT. So, Senator Cruz, I saw your hand up.
On page 63, Mr. Chairman, is that a typo? Healthy Futures Fund is just kind of sitting there on line 17. Is there something that's supposed to go before it or after it?
No, that's the special fund under special fund column that tells you the source of that special fund. So if you look at the table, you have general fund, special fund, total.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so that identifies
I see that number over there, but I'm
Yeah.
just trying to figure out on 17, it's just kind of sitting there by itself, and I keep
Right,
trying
there should have been a superscript of
Okay.
1, for example, on that 513, and then 1 in front of that healthy.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll make sure that when we format the bill, that becomes more obvious. Any other questions? If not, we'll then proceed to, that concludes the health section. Oh, Senator Tenorio, did you have, okay. All right. That concludes the health section, and we'll proceed with Chapter 4, the Unified Judiciary. The appropriations are authorized from the General Fund and federal matching grant and aids. The total appropriation available to the judiciary as compared to last year is a slight increase, but it is an increase. Their total allocation this year has increased by 1.3% over last year's appropriation levels. So, Senator Tenorio, you wanted to?
I just have a question on the line 2.
Yes.
Some years ago, it's with 8 years now, the judiciary has been unified, and so is there a section in code somewhere that says that it shall be called the unified judiciary, or is it just the judiciary?
Right, it's codified. It's called the unified.
I was just checking because it seems to be at this point redundant. They've already been brought together, so I don't understand the point of the preceding term at this stage in the game.
I understand. I actually would like to keep it in there because Jack Abramoff just got released from jail. So we never know.
It's a 3.3% if you include these two. Yeah.
So, just in case. I know that, but I understand he's serving pizza in Boston now. Is the latest that. too much information.
That's a 3.3 including these.
Yeah, okay, so the appropriation level to their base operating level is a 1.3% increase. If you include the appropriation made to the court-appointed attorneys and the adult juvenile court, the total increase for the operations of the judiciary is 3.3% above last year. So Section 2 is the $800,000 for the court-appointed fees for indigent defense, and that's the amount that was requested. Section 3 is the adult juvenile drug court, and this is the court, of course, that we want to continue to fund. I think the judiciary has done a great job in proving and demonstrating that this alternative courts, especially in the drug court, has resulted in avoided costs, not savings, but definitely avoided costs to the judiciary and to DOC, in that they're able to divert these individuals to other programs instead of confining them, and that this investment is well worth it. So this is, again, the level of funding of $698,952. Section 4 is the Emily's, I think it's called Emily's House? It's the Erica's House, I'm sorry. The Family Visitation Center, and this is funded from the Safe Streets Fund, which is a federal grant that we get, and that's funded at $148,000, and the Unified Judiciary provides the support for the operation of this Family Visitation Center. Section 5 is the transfer authority contained, the same as last year, to transfer funds from the appropriations made in Section 1 into the appropriations in 2, 3, 4, and 5, but not out of these 2, 3, 4, and 5 into Section 1. So Section 1 is the base, 3, 4, and 5 are these programs. They can transfer money out of the base into the program, but not out of the program into the base, to ensure that those programs continue to receive the support set forth in this body. And then, of course, Senator Uggan? And then Section 6 is the continuing appropriation, and again, the unexpended balance of the funds from FY 2010 will not lapse and continue to be available to the judiciary in FY 2011. Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just generally speaking, I know that we discuss ARRA funding mechanisms of support for various government entities, but I believe that the judiciary is also going to be in receipt of in excess of $3 or $4 million specifically to upgrade their computerized system or their programs that they utilize. So that's going to be part of their additional expenditures over the course of the fiscal year 11. I want to just thank you on a personal note on continuing to fund the adult and juvenile drug courts. Mr. Speaker, if there's one program that is, to me, I consider extremely successful, and is something that is not touted nationwide, but under the adult and juvenile drug courts, collectively, there's a recidivism rate of 17%. Nationwide, the average is anywhere from 34 to 37% for the recidivism rate for adult and juvenile drug courts. And that bodes, I mean, that speaks very well in terms of how successful that program is. Obviously, we want that percentage to be zero, but in this case, it's significantly below the national average. And acknowledging that these two courts were initially funded federally, and after the first 3 years had to be consumed locally, whether in fact the local community wanted to accept that additional obligation, and that was a decision of this legislative body about 8 years ago, and to see it continue to be funded and knowing full well that the resources are being properly expended, and it's an extremely successful program. I just want to thank you again for reinforcing the funding for this program and for the judiciary. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Uggan. I certainly want to thank you for working with the committee on this, but the court also came, of course, and presented their needs. And, we, given the revenue levels from this year to next year, we really have had to be very, very careful in terms of providing the support to programs of the departments and agencies. And while we would have loved to have given them what they asked for, it just is not there. And in fact, we've given them a little bit more than what they have this year, what's been released this year to them. So thank you very much for that, noting that attempt by this committee. We are now in Chapter 5, Executive Branch. Section 1 is the legislative intent in terms of outlining once again, the revenue gaps and what this body has had to do in order to make the revenues fit or the expenditures fit the revenues, because in the past, budgets were developed so that the revenues fit the expenditures. I think for the last couple of years, budgets have been developed where the expenditures fit the revenues, and there's a huge difference between those two approaches. And I think that we've seen it with regards to the management and holding the line on the deficit, as well as making reductions in the deficit in the past. Section 2 appropriates to the base operating budget of the executive branch, executive direction. This is basically the governor's office and its components. The total amount available is $6.105 million. This amount level is basically taken from the current expenditure levels that the governor has allotted for himself in the budget that was appropriated to him. So while it may look like we have reduced the governor's budget, we have reduced it in conformance and with guidance from how he has reduced his own budget by the allotment allocation. So, and again, he did that because of the fact that the revenues are below the what was projected for this fiscal year. So the amounts are for $4.5 million. 4.204 is for executive direction within the office of the governor. Of that, $658,000 is also appropriated from the general fund for the operations of Government House. $181,935 of the appropriation for executive direction is for the Bureau of Information Technology. $663,458 are to fund the medical referral offices in the contract. Basically, this is a contractual cost for the offices in Los Angeles, Honolulu, and the Philippines. $333,000 is for the Guam Liaison Office in Washington, D.C. Again, this is the appropriation levels within the executive branch of the government under executive direction. Again, we broke out the cost accounting, the cost centers of health benefits and object category for increments and promotions are also allocated to those cost pool. Section 4 provides agency expenses appropriated to the center costs. And again, I mentioned that and repeating that one. And then subsection 4 is $30,000 to the Guam State Clearinghouse for training, supplies, and equipment associated with the negotiations of the government of Guam's indirect cost allocation under the federal grants. And so that is the executive direction portion of the executive branch budget. The next, any other questions? Okay. The next executive branch budget allocation is for the Ancestral Lands Commission. And this is for the operation of the ancestral lands. $206,000 is allocated for the operation of the Ancestral Lands Commission. That is within the within the level requested by the governor. So no changes. So the ancestral lands, that's funded. the Bureau of Management and Budget, there's a reduction that you'll see a little bit in the wages, and that is for the vacancies that are not being funded in this request. I think there's 1 or 2 vacancies. I think 2 or 3 vacancies will not be funded, and this is again based on their current expenditure level and support for their operations.
You know, half of the budget is actually appropriated in fund balance, like in section.
Yeah, right. And the source of the funding for BBMR, general fund support, as well as the appropriation from the indirect cost fund, the fund balance, there's about $1.5 million in that fund balance of the indirect cost fund, and BBMR will be receiving $138,870 of that fund balance.
Actually, this is the fund balance. So their total budget's about 12.5 million. It's the base plus the fund balance in the next page. Plus, next page. Plus this.
For BBMR.
So the base operations plus this fund balance is their total budget. So their total's about 1.25.
Okay. Just as a note, the 687,520 that you see in the table, that is the basically half of the total budget of BBMR. This table reflects appropriation from the general fund and appropriation from the indirect cost fund. In section 4 that you'll see on page 78 is the other half of BBMR's budget, which is the unreserved fund balance from the indirect cost fund. So that's 637,000. So the total budget for BBMR is not the 687 that you see, but it's the 687 plus the 637. So I wanted to make that clear, because if you only looked at that table and then go back, you'll think that we cut them in half. And we don't want to make BBMR that unhappy, since they also control our allotment. So that the total budget is available to them. We funded increments again based upon their request, and an additional 30,000 is available to them from the indirect cost fees collected in fiscal year 2011 for additional training, supplies, and equipment for BBMR as it relates to negotiating for that indirect cost fund. The indirect cost allocation or indirect cost rate this year is about 17%. So of all of the federal grants that allow for administrative costs, 17.6%, I believe, is reserved and used for administrative costs to support the departments and agencies that provide services to those grants, and BBMR is one of those agencies. So that is the appropriation level for the Bureau of Budget and Management. No additions or deletions? We'll proceed with the Civil Service Commission. The budget for the Civil Service Commission this year is 8.05, and there is an increase in the salaries and wages, and that is we are funding 3 vacant positions at the Civil Service Commission as requested by the Civil Service Commission. The positions are for a Personnel Management Analyst 3, Personnel Specialist 4 Supervisor, and a Personnel Specialist 3. And this recommendation is pursuant to the CSC's implementation based upon Public Law 30-112, which reinstated some functions that were transferred out of them previously. So when we put back the function, we're also putting back some money to support that function going back to them. And so this is the increase, the reason for the increase in the budget. That is the budget for the Civil Service Commission. The next,
Section 12 is the same to DOA, $1 billion fund balance in addition to the
Yes, Senator Guthrie.
Mr. Chairman, as you know, rather recently, Senator Palacios and I introduced the bill that became law that transferred some of the functions back to the Civil Service Commission that was earlier transferred to the Department of Administration.
That's correct.
And I'm wondering if this section on the Civil Service Commission reflects those changes that included the return of the functions that should include the return of the positions,
Yes.
the FTEs.
Yes, and that's why we funded the three additional vacancies at the department. And then we're also working with the Department of Administration to ensure that those positions that are specific to those will revert back. We're trying to work out the ASO administrative officer positions because of the change in the staffing levels of the Civil Service Commission. In the past, they had an ASO, Administrative Service Officer. When some positions and functions were transferred out, even with the new transfer of positions back, the size of the agency by rules and regulations do not qualify for an administrative services officer position. They only qualify for an administrative, I forgot the title.
Assistant?
Something in that, yeah, it's not an ASO, but it's an administrative services, administrative provision officer, not an administrative services officer. So we're trying to work that because the individual that transferred out is at DOA, and he's there as an ASO, but to move him back to civil service, the agency doesn't allow him, the rules and regs doesn't allow an ASO position there. So we're trying to work that out. But it does recognize the return of those functions and we are funding those three vacancies.
Okay. Chief? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Guthertz. The next department is the Department of Administration. Again, this is DOA is being funded, part of it from the indirect cost fund balance, and part of it, of course, from this year's special indirect cost fund allocation and the general fund. So the base operating budget is $6.64 million under funding from FY 2011 sourced funding, plus funding of $1,500,000 from the unreserved fund balance of the indirect cost fund for its base operating. So the total fund or amount available to the Department of Administration is $7,646,4704. So that is the funding level that's being provided to the Department of Administration. Once again, we break out the cost fund and so forth. There are other appropriations made to the Department of Administration for programs, payment of services and programs under their purview as administrating the financial end of that. There's a support of child in custody under Title 19 GCA, and 684 of this amount, 170, is appropriated to the Department of Administration for payment of services provided for this program under that statute. The Residential Treatment Fund, this is funds made available to the Department of Administration to pay for the expenses of persons that have been ordered by the Superior Court who require residential care. And part of this is made to payments for off-island vendors, for those individuals that we sent off-island that we don't have the services to provide for them here. But also part of this now, by the change in statute, allows for individuals that are able to be provided services on Guam. So this is the amount that was requested, and this is the amount we are providing. Senator Palacios, did you have a question?
This is for the Department of Administration. I'm looking at the on page 82 under the summary, about the what we discussed about the funding, the $4,000 for the citizen-centric reporting workshop.
Oh, yes.
That it's a, you know, it's going to be conducted, I guess, a series of 3 to 4 hours of workshop.
It's under section,
Yes.
it's under section 10.
Section 10, Senator Palacios. Yeah, but we noted that. So Section 10 provides $30,000 from the 2011 collections
Thank you,
under
sir.
indirect costs for the training program for that citizen-centric reporting.
Thank you. Very good. It's, we didn't get to that. That's
Yes,
why.
we didn't. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So again, the residential treatment fund, these are the levels that were requested by the administration. The government claims fund receives $100,000 for FY 2011. The general purpose financial statement audits, $377,000 for DOA for the entire GovGuam audit, the single audit requirement of the receipt for federal grants. Section 8 is the single audit report for the Tourist Attraction Fund, and that is a cost of $18,000. Section 9 is $18,000, the same for the Guam Highway Fund. And then Section 10 is the $30,000 from the Indirect Cost Fund for the implementation of the training program for continuing education for that citizen-centric reporting. This again is the legislature's continued commitment towards transparency and accountability, and one step further of being user-friendly. It allows us to get these reports on how money is expended in the different departments and agencies in layman's language, and we don't need to be a CPA then to follow where the money's going under this reporting requirement. Section 11, this is the appropriation for bank fees to the Department of Administration. This is something that we are finally recognizing and accounting for, because if we don't recognize this, then this bank fees are taken right off the top of revenues. So when we appropriate $540 million, we really only have and would collect, if we are right on target, we only have $537 million available, because the bank fees that are charged for payments received through credit cards and debit cards are taken off the top by the paying agents, so that that money doesn't become available, and then we become short by that amount. So this is our way of addressing that issue, and what we've done is we're appropriating $900,000 from the general fund for bank fees for the first quarter of the year. And then the remaining $2 million are in the appropriation for the base operating budget for DOA. And what we are requiring then is that DOA goes out and enters into a contract with a paying agent for the receipt of these payments, in which the paying agent will be able to charge a convenience fee for the receipt of these payments when they process them, and the government of Guam gets the gross amount of the bill that is being paid, so that the money is not taken off the top, but the money is charged by the paying agent. And so this would require then Department of Administration to work with that. This arrangement was suggested and discussed during the Special Accounting Service and the Special Economic Service meeting, and we are incorporating this provision in here based upon discussion and recommendation by that. So this would allow us then to account for these bank fees without reducing the resources available to the government of Guam. So that concludes the discussion on the Department of Administration. It is now noon and would request a motion to recess until 2. All right, there's a motion to recess until 2. No objections? Thank you very much, and Sejusmasi. Back in session. When we broke from lunch, we were in subsection F of, this is chapter 5. Chapter 5, which is the executive direction portion of the budget. We are on the Guam Election Commission. The Guam Election Commission's budget this year totals 1.092, and the there is an increase in the Guam Election Commission budget. We increased the budget by $100,000 for the contractual to cover the expenses of the special election so that they'll carry them into the general election. There's also an increase of $24.5 thousand for rent, and we also allowed them to, we funded the past due for? Yeah. Okay. So if you recall that there was the Election Commission spent money for the special election, and we've reimbursed them for that so that they'll be able to carry forward into the general also for next fiscal year. So any amendments, additions, or deletions? If not, we'll then continue. The other addition is a $250,000 for the decolonization registry as we move forward on the self-determination issue. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so that's the appropriation level for the Election Commission. We have the appropriation for rev and tax next.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker?
Yes.
Just on that decolonization, is there any way that we can define to some extent, I know not in this legislation per se, but it's already defined in the law, but perhaps set some timelines in terms of accomplishing certain things, because I think that that's very extremely critical considering what's down the horizon. And by virtue of funding it, I think it's great that you're providing the funding mechanism. Now it's more or less allowing the process to move, not expeditiously for a purpose for the sake of time, but really in a timely manner so that in fact we can get that voting process completed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Senator Duggan. And we will be doing that. Should find somebody to introduce. Ask Frank if he wants to introduce. Okay. Rev and tax. The appropriation level. Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Guthers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, could we set a date for the vote?
Plebiscite? I think, Senator Guthers, if I may.
I was going to suggest March 4, 2012.
Well, I say that with the appropriation for the registry, the requirement of the election is that it be called when we achieve a 70% registration level. And I think with this $250,000 appropriation, let's give it some time to work, and then they'll come back and in 6 months, 5 months, we'll reevaluate exactly where they are with the additional resource, and then we can step in and take a look at that. But I think we should give this the opportunity to get implemented, and we'll move and then reevaluate the date. Rather than setting a date and having to reschedule once again.
This money is going to the Election Commission?
That's right, for the registry. So,
okay, all right, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Senator. Department of Revenue and Taxation receives a base budget of $11.298 million. Again, there were increase in salaries and benefits and office rental expense. There was also, of course, the ability to additional money coming out of the Tax Collection Enhancement Fund of $685,000. And then we had that provision in the ACTC reimbursement that they will be able to receive 10% of that for enhanced tax collection on the reimbursements that we get. So that could provide them conceivably up to another $1.8 million. So while the budget may look like it's a base budget, there is opportunities built in the budget for additional resources to rev and tax. Senator Respicio?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I actually would like to offer an amendment at this time, and I want to thank you for asking me to do this on your behalf. This amendment would reappropriate the $300,000 that your committee and this legislature has made available to Revenue Tax by way of Public Law 2903, and that's to hire their tax attorney. And so what this amendment will do would allow them to take any of the unencumbered and unexpended funds and allow them to use this balances to hire vacancies, which may also include a tax attorney for the upcoming fiscal year 2011.
All right.
Copies have been made available and it's been distributed.
Okay. On the amendment, there's no objection? Amendment
Mr.
carries.
Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Respicio. And then there's a, one of the things we're asking revenue tax employees is to do more with the current resources, especially with the acceleration of the income tax refund processing and reimbursement of the federal funds. So, and we allowed them to use a merit bonus increase that is current statute, and this Section 4 here provides $30,000 to implement that after the approval of the plan by the governor. So we are providing them resources and incentives. So, all right. Thank you, Senator Argun.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a quick question in terms of numerical comparison. So did I hear you correctly that for fiscal year 11, revenue tax will receive an additional 1.8?
They have the ability, when we accelerate the reimbursement of the additional child tax credit, we allowed them to keep 10% of the reimbursement for their operations. So that would be on top of this an additional 1.8, depending on how fast we get the reimbursement.
So outside of that, the 11.2 is very similar in nature to what they received in 10, fiscal year
Right,
10.
and this includes the funding for a couple of vacancies also, I think, still.
Okay, and the only reason why I bring that up, Mr. Speaker, and you're absolutely right, there's a mechanism here that would allow them to expedite the processing of some of the income taxes. But I know that repeatedly, practically every year, it's like the same statement coming out of the incumbent director that, in fact, they need more resources to hire personnel, and the target always comes in this direction.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that extremely unfortunate because many of us have a good working relationship with the incumbent director, but then when it he goes on the radio and they question him about the process, it's always the legislature has not appropriated enough funding.
Right.
And I find that this somewhat disturbing, and I certainly hope that in this particular case that he utilizes the tools in this budget in conjunction with the additional $300,000 that was just approved with the floor amendment to be able to, I guess, recruit and to hire the necessary personnel to a limited degree so that they can reinforce some of their efforts. And also, Mr. Speaker, under the, not the ARA funds, but under the Affordable Care Act, there are some resources that would support agencies such as Revenue Tax for upgrading their systems. Not necessarily for additional personnel, but to upgrade their systems. And the formula there is that it has to be a 50-50 match. So if in fact they're able to avail themselves of some of those grants, then at least perhaps they can bring it back to your attention if in fact there's a need for the additional matching, but to upgrade some of their systems there so that it can help them with their efficiency and their timelines in terms of being able to more expeditiously process the tax refunds, I think would be very helpful. But I hope that the statements that are made are no longer continuing to come to this desk or to this legislative body, but in concert and collaboratively with the executive branch, that he'll be able to hire his necessary personnel, because that has always been the intent of this legislature, Mr. Chairman, since I first came in, is trying to provide as much resources, understanding the limitations of our budgets, and to see that in fact of just over the last 5 or 6 years, every single year, I think I've always heard that statement at least once or twice or not even more, that the legislature is to blame for not funding, and this, I think, provides that mechanism. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you very much. And just for the record, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair and Mr. Senator, the body for the last 2 fiscal years have funded vacancies for the Department of Revenue and Taxation. I think 16 vacancies fully funded. We were able to convince BBMR to release the GG1s for those vacancies. So they were funded, the GG1s were authorized, so they had the opportunity to hire new people up to 16. And I think for over the last 2 fiscal years, they've hired 2. So even though everything's in place to hire, in addition, of course, the body has upgraded the compensation for the tax enforcement officials by 10%. So we really have continued to support the needs of the department. And now we're saying to the department, if you perform, there's even more. And so I think this is a good approach to continue to work with them. Thank you. The Bureau of Statistics and Plans is receiving 1.135587. This is a pretty much a status quo budget from the current operational requirements of the department, and this would include office rental for the Guam Disabilities Council, right? There's a council that is under Bureau of Statistics and Plans, and they're funded for their office rent under local funds as part of the maintenance of effort on the federal grant for that council. So no additions or deletions. We'll now then proceed to the Department of Public Works. The Department of Public Works will receive a total from the Highway Fund, Building Design Fund, Solid Waste Operations Fund, a total of $22,413,000 for the FY 2011. There is vacancies that were funded for a building inspector, for a customer services supervisor, a customer service representative, and a teleprocessing network coordinator. These were at the request of the department. There is a slight decrease in the funding of about 2%, but we are funding additional manpower resources requested. They will get the additional funding of $540,000 from the building design fee for their capital, for their building permit section that accelerates the building design and inspection division of the Department of Public Works. We're trying to, of course, work with the solid waste operations because the current operational requirements of solid waste is about $2.5 to $2.8 million, and they have about $6 million available. So we're trying to work with the courts and see if we can get some of that resources so that we can support some of the ancillary services being provided by DPW to the solid waste division. So that is the appropriation for the Department of Public Works. Contractual services will amount to $2.7 million that's being made available. Supplies and equipment of over $2.265 million for supplies and materials, and $635,000. Of course, the department continues to be supported by additional federal grants, and this is one of the agencies that is receiving federal highway grant funds for the department. And so that is the base operating budget for the Department of Public Works. Any additions or deletions to the department? If not, we will then proceed to the next entity, and this is the Guam Contractors License Board. This board is funded from the fees received by contractors who pay for their licenses, and it is fully funded by the revenue from the board itself. This is basically in line with their request for the Contractors Licensing Board, and the total amount requested was $585,167, and this is what is being provided to the board based upon FY 2010. They were authorized $669,000, so it's about an 11% decrease from their FY 2010 level. They're And again, this was based upon the projected revenue that was available to them out of the Contractors License Board fees. So it's always been fully funded out of the registration fees. Senator Palacios.
Just a question on the telephone appropriation. Is that 12,000 there? That's 12,000 for the telephone and toll?
Telephone was, yes, 12,000.
You know, recalling, of course, we went through the Civil Service Commission. It's only 3,000 showing for them, and I'm just wondering. And then there was, I guess, another. We passed it already for $4,800 for a year. I don't know, and this is just for the Contractors Licensing Board. It's for 12,000, and I remember, like I said, I remember the Civil Service Commission is appropriated only 3,000.
Right.
So I just want to point that out, sir.
Okay.
Maybe there's an explanation or what, I don't know.
No, I think they're in the DPW compound. Correct? Yeah. Or are they at the East-West Center? They're at the East-West Center, I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's correct.
No,
And-
maybe your committee can just verify that. That's all.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay, sir. All right.
We don't have anything for rent. No, you did. They said this is their request.
Yeah, the only thing we changed was payroll because it was based on the staff. Everything else is the same.
All right. Okay. All right. The next entity is the Appeals Board, and this is the Professional Engineers, Architect, and Land Surveyors Board. And again, this is a board that is funded strictly out of the revenue generated by the board for registration of the appropriate professional, in this case, the architects, the engineers, the land surveyors. And this included, of course, the funding for the current staff and I think, okay. And this, the Appeals Board was increased by 13% from the FY 2010 request. And the total amount made available to them is $215,196, and the increase was in object category contractual services. I'm sorry, in object category 290, which is under miscellaneous, for the purpose of assisting the Contractors License Board with the identification and certification process that the Appeals Board had, I think is it the other way around? Is it the Appeals Board, the Contractors Board that has automated their licensing appeals, right? Yeah, so they've automated their system so that their ID cards and their receipt, and so we're asking them to assist the Guam Contractors License Board and consult with them because Contractors License Board wants to do the same. So we're asking them to assist there. Okay, any additions or deletions? None. The next yes, Senator Blanc. You say
Mr. Chair, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a little clarification here. I see, and I'm looking back, actually page 106, line 6, Pills Fund 160,413. Where does that figure derive from?
Which one, sir?
On page 106,
Yes,
line 6,
line 6.
the highlight number. I just don't see where,
So,
what that figure
yeah, so
is there for. Likewise with the contractor's license board fund.
yeah, that line, I'm sorry, thank you very much, Senator Blas. Actually, that line should really just be deleted.
Thank you.
Because it's in the front page under the identification of the funding source and the funds of 215-196.
Yes.
So this was when we were earlier versioning it.
Okay, so then you may want to also look at page 103 on the contractor's license board fund. Line 6 as well.
That's correct. That should
Okay.
also be deleted. So on page 103, the amendment was to delete line 6 because that really shouldn't be there. It's
Yes.
already identified in the front on page 102 of the funding source. No objection?
And then,
And then-
continue the amendment,
On line
line 6, page 106.
106, that also should be deleted. No objections? Carries. Okay. Yes. Are you, Senator Blas? Thank you very much. Senator Uggan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just a quick question on page 107. I'm trying to understand the verbiage here from lines 8, the last paragraph, subsection 3, where it says the appeals board is authorized to expend up to the level of revenues collected for the appeals board fund, and then provided such expense does not exceed the total amount appropriated to the board from its operations from all sources of revenue. That all sources of revenue, Mr. Speaker, I think that there's only one revenue source right now at this time
Yes.
for the appeals board. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to understand that verbiage where it says you can expend up to all the revenues you collect, provided that that expense does not exceed the funds from all sources of revenue. I don't know. Am I misreading it or something, or misunderstanding? On page 107, subsection 3, it reads that the appeals board can expend up to the level of revenues collected under the board fund, and then provided such expense, you can spend all the money that you collect and you bring in, provided that your expense does not exceed the total appropriated to the
Appropriation,
board.
that's correct.
And the appropriation figure really is see, the appropriation figure, the way I look at it, that's your cap. So even if they collect in excess of 215 plus the 26, even if they collect 250,000, they're not able to expend beyond the appropriation figure.
That's correct.
So you don't see any conflict there where you can expend everything you bring in, you collect, but you cannot exceed the appropriated amount. But let's say, what if the revenues that come in for some odd reason, all of the appeals board and all the processing and applications come in, and it exceeds the revenue projection of, let's say, 280.
All right. Senator,
The reason that language is there is we didn't fully appropriate the projection, so there's an amount there that's not fully appropriated. Right? So they can,
Senator Barnes. Okay. Right.
And I know that Mr. Baldassi clarified it, and I just want to make sure that that's the way I understood it, in case that because there may be some figures that are not included here today that may be ascertained as the invoices or what have you come in. So
Okay.
I understand that.
right.
Thank you.
Senator Ada?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if we need language to clarify this, but I think in previous or existing law, it requires that these revenues that they bring in, either from testing fees, penalties, or whatever, is supposed to be deposited to the treasurer of Guam,
Okay.
who then sets up a separate account and credits that amount to that account. But there seems to be the interpretation over there that they actually can set up a private account with a bank, and then just draw from it as if it was a petty cash account. And it's not clear whether that's allowed by existing law. I think they're following the model by the Guam Accountancy Board, which explicitly allows that by law, but it is not clear in the case of the Appeals Board. The Appeals indicates that, you know, they are, I guess because of the time lag between getting their invoice and getting the check cut so they can pay dues and whatnot, that they've gone and they've established this bank account. So I don't know whether we need to address that here and make it clear that it's just this account via the treasurer of Guam,
Okay.
or they can go on their own and open a separate account. You know, so I'm a little confused about that.
Do we want to restrict the?
Well, it's being reviewed right now by the OPA, and I guess we can address that through appropriate legislation later, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Senator Adak. Okay. We're now at the Guam Police Department. No, that was never in there. The 10% was never in. Okay. The total appropriation to the Guam Police Department this year will total $22.890051, of which the Police Services Fund in the amount of $570,111 has been appropriated for their use. The increments and promotions are funded. Guam Police Department, we were very careful this time to ensure that we fund the hazardous pay, that it's clear that is funded, and that is funded at $1.752 million for night differential and holiday pay. Those are, and hazardous and the hazardous pay requirement by the Guam Police Department. This was based upon the submittal to the body. They had, it was part of their submittal, and I can't answer that. I couldn't tell you the difference, but that was based upon, I guess, what they pay out and what they submitted under the special pay category by GPD. So we'll find out, though. We'll find out why the difference, but I don't know right now. So, okay, but thank you. So we need to get that. Any other questions? Okay, Senator Palacios.
I just quickly review, of course, the three major agencies. So that, of course, looking at the overtime, that reflects only 4%. That is about 4% of the regular salaries. For the Department of Correction, it's 5%, but for the Guam Fire Department, it's about 10%.
Yes.
Actually, I think the standard, the acceptable average, I think, is 10% of growth of the salary. So I don't know whether they're comfortable with this, but I know that 4% is not enough. I guess if they can work it out, but I just want to point that out that they didn't ask enough.
Right.
So I haven't received any feedback from the Guam Police Department, but again, the amount showing on object class 112 is about only 4%.
Yeah.
But the fire department is 10% when we get there. We'll see.
We anticipate that there may be a need for some flexibility in this budget for, these kind of situations kind of depend on the kind of manager you have at the top in terms of managing overtime, special pay. And so, in addition to budgeting for them, there's also a 15% transfer authority that the governor's granted, who can move then from the other departments and agencies or other categories into these object categories that may run short. And we found in this year, fiscal year budget, that there were instances in which the governor did exercise his transfer authority, and that's what's been able to keep to a minimum. It's not that we're able to immediately meet the needs, but once it begins accumulating beyond acceptable and tolerable levels, the governor does exercise his transfer authority and supplements these budgets from transfers in other agencies which may have underspent and over budgeted. So I realize that, and we recognize that, Senator Palacios, but again, we decided that one way we would address that would be that flexibility that's granted to the governor. So
also, sir, I understand of course, the 10% hazardous pay on page 109. I understand that that's for motorcycle assignment.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know what is the 8% about.
Yeah.
Maybe I can find out now. I'm curious about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. All right. Any other comment on GPD? If not, we're at the Department of Corrections now. Oh, I'm sorry. Senator Blas, I'm sorry. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking at the breakdown of the object class categories for the different agencies, and I'm noticing that there is no consistency with regards to workers' compensation, and I know in GPD it's about $20,387, and revenue tax is $1,000, and some public works is $0. Is there a
The workman's compensation is a figure that's given to us by the departments and agencies, and it's really for I think in most instances, it's for their existing obligations under that. So they identify what their obligations are under existing workman's compensation cases, and we budget for that for known cases. And then for those that happen throughout the year, then they're able to take some of the regular pay category and
So we
use
can
that.
move-
Right.
Okay, thank
So
you.
this will be over and above what's their personnel level, and then they're able to use that object category, the salaries, to meet the workman's compensation award under when they get injured on the job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Adda.
Yes, I noticed there's on page 108, line 18, capital outlay, there's no funds that have been budgeted for replacement of police cars and whatnot.
Right.
Is that the way the department submitted their budget? No capital outlay?
GPD. Is this the budget request? Are we sure? Yeah. Yeah. I'm reviewing that. I don't. Yeah. I don't see, I don't see any amount under capital outlay.
Part of the reason is they got all those police cruisers,
Yeah.
like 100 or 50 they got from, remember when we had GSA left
Yeah,
for that?
yeah. See, this is like, Selena, where's the budget request? Senator Adda, I don't, from what we have here, they did not budget under capital outlay. They were able to get some police cruisers, I think about 40 or, I'm not sure how much, from GSA that were surplused from the military. Remember that they received like 40 new vehicles, the sports track, the Crown Victorias that were new and surplus by the federal government And they were, GPD got about 40 new vehicles.
They were like probably, well, I guess those vehicles, I guess they change them out like every 5 years. But
Yeah.
So that's why,
Yeah.
that's basically how they're going to replace their aging fleet.
Right. So, and their budget submittal was 0 under capital outlay. So
Okay.
we did not reduce it.
All right, thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Department of Corrections. The budget for Department of Corrections totals 15.490, of which 1 million is from the Department of Corrections revolving fund, and 96,000 is from the Safe Streets Act. This shows a slight decrease from the budget request. The original budget request was about $19 million, of which 7 million of that was for special pay and overtime. Special pay and overtime, and that really was a big increase. One of the ways that we've made up for a decrease in their budget is we've actually budgeted a new cycle of firefighters that will be brought on board, which if they're brought on board, then it'll alleviate the overtime. I'm sorry. There are 26 new officers that are being budgeted in this. So this is, while it may be a decrease from their request, it's actually an increase because now we've funded 26 new corrections officers for the operations of the department. So that is the funding level. Once again, we have special pay specifically identified in the budget, and there's special pay for hazardous, night differential. And again, there's that 10%, 8% difference, and we'll find out exactly what that's for.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman?
I'm curious also.
Yeah.
Senator?
Is there going to be, do we need a provision in here to authorize the payment of last year's whatever's owed? Like, for example, I understand we still owe the federal prisons.
Right. Yes,
So-
there's a provision in Section 4 for that Bureau of Prisons past due obligation. And what we did was there was an appropriation contained in Public Law 30-37. There was an appropriation for the lease of JFK temporary campus in Public Law 30-37. That appropriation was not used because Cortec took tax credits instead. So what we did was we redirected that appropriation to be used in the authority to pay for the Bureau of Prisons debt. And we instead put a tax credit feature again in the budget for the JFK lease for Cortec.
And what about amounts that may be due to like Guam Water and Guam Power Authority? So I understand, I think by the time this fiscal year closes out, they will have some outstanding bills.
We anticipate that there'll be a short or a small surplus in the utility cost pool because we've reduced the GPA billing has been lower than the total amount. The GWA billing is greater than the total amount bill. So the governor, because we pulled that, they can actually use then the surplus under power to pay for the increase in water. So we hope that's going to resolve it. I can't tell you for sure, but the way we've looked at the tracking and the payments out of that and the billings, there will be a slight surplus in the power, about $300,000 surplus in the utility cost pool.
Yeah, I thought we exhausted that though with last week's appropriation for DOE, GPSS.
No. We took the savings from the reduction in the LEAC. This is from actual consumption. From consumption, there'll be about a $300,000 surplus.
All right, thank you.
Okay. All right. Any additions, Senator Tydegui, and then
Yes,
Senator Barnes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, there's a major concern, as you know, in the newspaper and television with regards to the overtime payment that's due to the correction officers. I believe that amount might be at today a little bit over $800,000, if I'm not mistaken, and currently right now they're actually taking it to court. So that being said, and considering where we're at in the 2010 budget, if we're able to even have that funding that was given to them in the 2010 budget versus what is coming up in the 2011, have you had the opportunity to view what's going on with that?
Yeah. We received a message from BBMR director, and today on addressing these overtime issues. And what she's indicated is that when they saw the overtime creeping up, she's actually gone in and worked with the department heads to control that overtime, and that they will have a surplus in some of the utility cost pool that they may then tap, because they can transfer that, and they may transfer that to other agencies like the overtime overruns and so forth. So they are aware, BBMR is aware of the increase in overtime. They've worked with the departments and agencies to take control of it, and they are looking at the different appropriation levels and expenditures for the object categories, and they are prepared to make some adjustments to try and cover some of that increase in overtime.
Considering thank you, Mr. Chair, for that information. It's good to hear somewhat, but it doesn't correct a problem that will probably happen again in 2011. Unlike the police department, when they go into overtime, it's easy for them to, okay, stop, no more overtime. Nobody will take this route down this street. We will have to pull one police officer off and not handle that. In the Department of Corrections, Mr. Chair, they can't do that. They don't have the luxury. They have to oversee the inmates that are there. So I'm quite concerned with regards to that. Now, the special pay does not address any type of overtime. Section 1, 2, 3, and 4, I don't see an area that would address that overtime in the event, and considering the fact they have recruited and in the process of training additional correction officers, as we know today, they're still short. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the good chair of public safety might know those numbers, but I think it's still around 130 police correction officers still needed in that area. And thus knowing that shortage still being there, then that the overtime is going to also increase as well with that respect. So I was just wondering, Mr. Chair, if that was in consideration.
Sure, I understand. I just want to state for the record that the committee did fully fund the request of the department for overtime. So we did not adjust it downward. We fully funded their request in addition to the additional 26 officers.
Okay, Mr. Chair, that being said, and let it know for the record that the individual for DOC gave you that amount and did not anticipate the overtime, and thus gave it to you, and you have been very good and gracious in fulfilling that money amount. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Tydegui. Senator Barnes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chair, I just want to share with you that based on the information I received as Oversight Chair, and I was just looking fast forward into the oversight that I have with Parks and Recs, and the differences between the 10% and the 8% on hazardous pay. The 10% as quoted is for law enforcement, actual officers, and then the 8% is, at least for Department of Parks and Recs, it would be for the trash collectors,
Okay.
which DOA would call dirty pay, but on this
I see.
arena, I think it would be for the administrative portion, so
Okay.
that's the difference, is 10% is law enforcement officers,
Okay.
so.
Thank you very much, Senator Barnes, for making that information available to the body. So, any other comments, additions? Department of Corrections? We'll then proceed to the Department of Agriculture. The Department of Agriculture will receive total funding from all sources, local sources, of $2.788,629,000, of which $88,000 of that will be the Guam Plant Inspection and Permit Fund. In addition, of course, the department will provide the special pay for individuals, mostly in the conservation area, who are eligible for the pay, and then, of course, increments and promotions. One of the questions we've had in the past is we authorized by law a rank structure at the Department of Corrections for their conservation officers. And my latest conversation with and we funded that at $57,000 last year. And so my understanding is that they are going to fund that and implement the ranking structure and are beginning the process of identifying the individuals. So we will have a captain, I think, a lieutenant, and maybe a sergeant for the ranking structure within the conservation officers for the Department of Agriculture. So that is the amount of 2.7. In addition, of course, they receive straight out federal grants for some of their programs at the Department of Agriculture. That's it. All right. Any other comments or questions?
So the 88,919 is specifically for the special funds, for the Guam Plant and Inspection and Permit Fund.
That's correct. Yes. Okay. The next entity is the Guam Public Library. The Guam Public Library will receive $1.24134 from the general fund for support of its operations. Increments and promotions are for the employees are at $16,290, and the this is a slight decrease in the budget for the public library from their initial request of about $1.5 million, and that included certain
There's vacancies that went further.
yeah.
And a lot of these budgets that went down.
Right.
Usually the difference is vacancies.
Yeah. So again, this is the based upon the current and existing expenditure levels, and any reduction is not a reduction to any current staffing requirements and existing staff at all. There were some additional vacancies that were requested that were not funded in the request due to just the revenue levels in the budget. So, but it does not decrease the existing staff at all at the library or operations. So that's the Department of Youth Affairs is next, and the Department of Youth Affairs will receive in the upcoming fiscal year $4.25617 million, of which $199,000 is from the Healthy Futures Fund. There was a request by Senator Cruz to review the appropriation made to the Department of Youth Affairs for that nurse and Senator Cruz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. At the very end of the DYA section, I passed out an amendment to add a new subsection 5 about carryover authorization of that appropriation that you made.
Yes.
Oh. In Public Law 30-101. I'm sorry, I thought it had been distributed.
Okay.
It's just authorization to carry it over. I received word from them that they have not expended that the sum that was given to them because of the fact that it was so late in being received.
Right, okay. So on the amendment by Senator Cruz, any objections? No objections? The amendment carries. This is the from the supplemental reprogramming budget that we had. So, all right. Thank you. Any other changes or additions to the DYA portion? If not, we're at the Guam Environmental Protection Agency. This is an increase in the Environmental Protection Agency budget. If you recall, we had some problems with the timing of the issue of the receipt of federal funds, which caused a shortfall in their budget. The committee looked at that very carefully, most especially with regards to some of the programs that they have that need to be funded. And so this represents an increase in their funding level. The increase comes from an appropriation of $449,000 for their beach monitoring program from the Tourist Attraction Fund, and this was the amount that was reduced requirement, or that was set aside in the TAF funding for the Plaza de España, which is now being funded by the 5 increase in the borrowing for the Educational Museum. And Senator Cruz, you're recognized.
Yes, Mikey wants to make an amendment.
Yes?
I've been given an amendment
Yes, yeah, all right. Does the
for a
clerk have a
new R1, 5R1,
Okay,
and it's to make that transfer of 100,000.
right, yeah. The amendment that's been, did they copy it? I have it here. It's being copied. It's being copied. What this does is it reduces the $400,000 appropriation out of the Tourist Attraction Fund to 300, to 100,000, and it moves the remaining balance of 349,211 to the Department of Parks and Rec for the maintenance of the new pool that's going to be come online in the new fiscal year. So it basically changes this appropriation of 4491211 to 100, and then the balance goes to Parks and Rec. Okay.
Right, it's on page 125.
That's correct.
Starting on line 10.
Yes.
That 449 goes down to 100, and the difference of 339 is then appropriated to the maintenance of the 2 pools.
Yes. Okay. So, Senator Blas?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just a quick question. What is beach monitoring when it comes to EPA?
EPA does testing of the waters, reporting. They're required by a portion of their federal grant also to report on the status of the beaches when you see those advisories that are sent out.
So it's a
Yeah.
part and parcel of federal mandate that we're funding? It's part and parcel of federal mandate that we're funding?
Yes, it's part of the federal mandate in order to continue to receive other grants.
Is this a match?
No. Well, they are, they get, it's a straight out appropriation to the Beach Monitoring Division program of EPA. They get some federal funding, and it's short for that, so we're supplementing it with the local funding.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so on the amendment by Senator Cruz, no objections? The amendment carries. Okay. It goes to Parks and Recreation for maintenance of the northern pool sports complex.
It's for both pools.
Both pools,
Hagåtña
Hagåtña and the
and-
northern. They were short in that amount. They had requested about 500,000 from TAF.
Aren't I a good marionette?
Okay. That's it. Okay. All right. So that is the change in the EPA section. The next section of the bill is the Department of Labor and AHRD. The total amount for the Department of Labor is $2.4 million, $438,548. Funding from the Manpower Development Fund of $1,040,064, and general fund level is 1.374. This is pretty much in line with the request for the agency, and that would give them an increase in the Manpower Development Fund because of the increase in the collection level based upon the increase in fees and, of course, applications. The other appropriation that goes to the Department of Labor is for the Workmen's Compensation Fund, and that amount is being funded at $798,593, and this is the request of the administration. In addition, they may use $40,000 to pay for legal services for workers' compensation hearings, and the ability to use this has really facilitated these hearings at the Department of Labor. And so that is the amount for Department of Labor. Any amendments or deletions? If not, we'll then proceed to the Department of Parks and Recreation. Department of Parks and Recreation will receive total funding of $3.151136, plus the newly change of the additional $300-something thousand that was just passed in the amendment by Senator Cruz. And this is pretty much in line with the requirement. We continue to fund maintenance and repair of the public restrooms in the amount of $520,000, and that amount is coming out of the Tourist Attraction Fund. So we'll continue that contract. Senator Tide-Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, based on the budget digest that was submitted to us, I know there are quite a bit of changes there. As I'm looking at the total amount that was requested, it was $4,971,332, and you're mentioning that it's $3,151,13. Where was the cuts made in this request? I'm looking at the general fund. Okay, I'm sorry, I found it. It's $3,945,419. So there was
A lot of those
a cut.
appropriations kind of below the line were embedded in their budget, which is why it looks like the 520 here.
Yeah, when Parks and Rec submitted their budget, the appropriations that we have, for example, like for the maintenance of the public restrooms, that was they put that as part of their budget request. We broke it out because of the different funding source. So when they were asking for
558 million? I mean, thousand?
for that amount, it included the 500,000. So what we did was we took out the 500, which reduced the amount. But it's actually an increase in their budget for this year, most especially with the new addition of that $349,000.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you very much. So Parks and Rec, no further addition or deletion. We'll now proceed to Department of Land Management. This is a budget of 22501. Land Management has transitioned from support from the general fund to, with the increases that we made in some of the recording fees, to a total operations being funded out of the land survey revolving fund. And the request this year was at 3.22501 for the Department of Land Management. That is, once again, in conformance with the appropriation made to the current operational needs of the department. So it does not reduce their current level of services that they're being provided under their current allotment schedules. So that's the amount that's being provided. Okay.
When we get to customs, we're still trying to sort out the red issue.
Right. The next department is the Chief Medical Examiner, and this is $401,000 for the Chief Medical Examiner. Pretty much a status quo budget from the request from their current operations. So, any additions or deletions? None. We'll continue then with the Veterans Affairs Office. The Veterans Affairs Office will receive $325,080 for the upcoming fiscal year, and this includes under contractual services $90,000.
It's an increase for the maintenance.
Right. So they have not hired the two people that they had projected that they wanted for the cemetery, and so what we did was to give them a little bit more flexibility. We actually, instead of budgeting that into salary, we budgeted under contractual and allowed him to decide that if it's going to be better service or better, more responsive service under a contractual arrangement, we allowed $90,000 to be moved to salaries or contractual, and that's in the legislative intent. So it is an increase to the budget level right. So, Senator Ada.
I don't know whether you received the input from my office, but actually the administrator, the current budget budgeted for the administrator's salary at the rate of a special assistant, whereas actually the administrator is a classified position at a lower rate. So my office was supposed to have submitted to you the adjustment that we made, assuming that you hire at the classified administrator position, and to take that money and put it down into, I guess, either it was supposed to go to the cemetery operations.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that will be contractual services or supplies and materials.
All right. So
I can follow up with my office.
all right.
To
If
make
you'll
sure
provide us with that information, and that would be an amendment that we will make that adjustment based upon the actual salary for the position, and move it into either contractual or supplies and equipment?
Right, yes, okay.
All right, so that'll be an amendment that will be fashioned based upon the information. So is there any objection to doing, to the motion presented by Senator Ada, so that we take the actual salary for the actual position and budget for that salary, and then any excess, put it into either contractual or supplies and materials? Senator Blas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, would that actually be necessary, recognizing that we're going to give them the flexibility to move around in the different object categories, 15%? I don't think that amount, is above the 15%.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Is it going to be necessary for us to be able to do that, recognizing that the administration, the executive branch, already has the authority to move the monies around in the different object categories as they see fit?
You're right, but I think it just better reflects the actual budgeting for the appropriate object categories. So he could take it out, but I think that Senator Ada wants to make sure that the actual labor costs are reflected in the budget. So I can see that'll help in terms of future budgets where they actually can tell exactly what the operating cost is under salary. So recognizing that the administration can do that, I think the amendment is still in order to reflect the actual allocation for the positions. So, okay? All right. Okay. No other additions or deletions to the Veterans Affairs? Customs and Quarantine. Customs and Quarantine is fully funded out of their Inspection Services Fund, and we have given them the entire amount that they have requested as being projected revenue for that. The one issue that remains, I guess, is the rent for their new facility that, yes, Mr. Badassi can talk to that a little bit more.
It's still unclear whether customs, or whether the airport is remitting the full amount of the customs collections to the Department of Administration, or if they're taking the rent off of the top. And so we're trying to figure out, do we need a budget for rent or not? And we're still trying to get that information at this time. So we didn't fully allocate all of the customs monies that are projected. There's still some there that hasn't been appropriated in the budget, and we're still waiting for that information.
Senator Gutherz.
In my discussions with the director,